The young man in a white t-shirt and jeans ran swiftly through the stone cave. He ran, looked around and started screaming. He did not understand what was happening or why he was the one caught in it. Behind him, several armed monsters were thudding. The boy held the girl's hand tightly. They ran swiftly down the narrow street. A few people stood on the other side. The girl was all sweaty and trying to catch her breath. Only then did they come out into a dead end. The boys heard someone coming straight toward them. The next moment, a fist hits the boy in the face. The girl stands aside, holding back fear on the other side of the fence. The crowd annoys him with blows. They start kicking and mocking, throwing nicknames at him. He covers himself with his hands and thinks he won't let her be hurt. Everything must be different. The girl held onto the fence mesh and tears appeared in her eyes. The boy thought it no longer mattered as long as she could break free and escape. One of the attackers with long hair continued beating and cursing the boy lying on the ground. His eyes slowly began to close. In this continuous darkness, white light began to grow and voices were heard. They were looking for Yamada. After that, another voice sounded. It greeted the heroes. The boy began to gradually open his eyes. He did not understand what was happening. A girl in unusual clothing appeared before the boy. She extended her hand to him and said that magic had summoned him. Her name was Mima. She served the kingdom of Arbus. Nearby stood soldiers in armor and the king who sat on the throne. Silence fell in the throne room. The girl still held her hand out in front of her. The beaten boy and his tormentors appeared before the king. The hall was enormous, 2 floors, and the place where the king sat was surrounded by columns. Mima thoughtfully pressed her palm to her face. A ring gleamed on her middle finger. Then the girl said that exactly 4 are called that. It turned out strange and in a strange way. The dark-haired boy with a wounded face and the red-haired girl looked at them in surprise and listened to the meme. She said that the 2 of them were mistakenly named, so now she would explain everything. The castle exploded. Its spires began to fall to the very bottom and various monsters attacked the people in armor. Mema said that many people died at the hands of different races and now humanity stands on the brink of extinction. The newly arrived gaped in astonishment. Mima then said that the boys were called to help people in this war. The group had already started shouting and expressing their dissatisfaction. Mima leaned forward a little and ordered everyone to calm down. A monster stood before the man and numbers shone above his head. Mima said that in this world there are levels. They give power according to numerical value. Each has their own level and it is impossible to be stronger than it. Characteristics appeared above one of the bandits. Mema said that as soon as the guys complete the task, they will be immediately sent home. The dark-haired boy stared blankly ahead. Then Mema approached the dark-haired boy with a bruise on his face. She smiled and said that he did not look like a hero, but she could check his level. The boy with the bruise on his face opened his mouth in surprise and stared at the smiling girl. Mema's eyes flashed and she began to activate the skill of level determination. The boy opened his mouth in amazement. A vision appeared above him. The king and others stared forward in surprise. They wanted to understand the level of the dark-haired boy. The first level appeared above the boy. His name was Tetsuya Takahashi. Sweat ran down Tetsuya's face and he stared gloomily ahead. Veins bulged on the king's face and he burst out shouting that Tetsuya really had only 1 level, that he was truly defective. Several armed men in armor grabbed Tetsuya. He looked around fearfully and streams of sweat ran down his face. The king shouted that Tetsuya must be executed, taken to the valley of death. The weak are not worthy to live. The men in armor held Tetsuya and began to lead him out of the room. The king extended his hand to the side and ordered that his decision be carried out immediately. Mema closed her eyes and stood silently. The blonde girl looked at Tetsuya with fear. The bandits who tortured Tetsuya watched as he was led out of the hall and began to laugh loudly. The blonde girl wanted to help Tetsuya, but knights held her back. Tetsuya thought that he was brought here against his will. Someone must save him. The sky was black and stars shone in it. Tetsuya thought that he did not want to die at all. The men in armor said they could not waste time because of someone like Tetsuya, and then they threw Tetsuya off a cliff. He fell down and screamed. Tetsuya fell and screamed, sweat running down his face. Eventually, he ended up on the ground. Tetsuya lay there and said that he was really still alive. Tetsuya got up and began to look around. Then he descended from that object and looked up. Tetsuya said that fortunately he managed to fall on something soft. He was really in another world. As they said before, there was no way out from here. Sweat trickled down Tetsuya's face. He looked around and asked how much longer he would have to stay here. If he didn't try to get out, then he would have to stay here to live. Tetsuya looked at his hand and began to turn it in different directions. Tetsuya said that the mage announced there is a level restriction. At level 1, it is impossible to be strong. He urgently needs to understand how to see his skills. After some time, Tetsuya said aloud that the status needs to be revealed. The next moment, a small frame appeared before him. Tetsuya began to rejoice that he managed to reveal his status. Tetsuya scratched the back of his head and looked at the stats screen. There was a name, age, magic power column, and other things. Tetsuya thought that with such stats he was weak. Tetsuya decided to activate his ability. Tetsuya recalls the words about the mage's girl. Everyone has an initial talent, and there is no person who does not have it. Tetsuya decides that in that case he is incredibly lucky. Not far from Tetsuya, footsteps echoed. The next moment, Tetsuya began to shout loudly. Tetsuya turned his head and looked into the very depths of the cave. From there, several armed monsters were reaching out to him. Drops of sweat ran down Tetsuya's wounded face. Soon he sprang up and, shouting, rushed to run. He would not fight these monsters, they were actually chasing him. The monsters raised their weapons and rushed after Tetsuya with all their might. Tetsuya clenched his fists and rushed forward, thinking that these monsters were too fast. No, he himself was too slow. But is it because he is level 1? Several monsters were running on the ground, and one of them suddenly found itself in the air. The monster reached for Tetsuya's leg. He said that he could not go any faster. In a moment, 2 monsters grabbed Tetsuya and began to knock him to the ground. Tetsuya was scared. He began to scream. Tetsuya found himself on the ground. One of the monsters was holding his stomach. Tetsuya tried to push him away with his hand. He grabbed the monster by the head and said that he had to get off him. Meanwhile, another monster began swinging a weapon right at Tetsuya. Tetsuya was hit on the head with a wooden stick and flew to the side from the impact. Tetsuya lay on the ground, eyes closed, and began to moan in pain. The same armed monster hovered over Tetsuya again and began swinging, shouting. Several monsters hovered over Tetsuya and began hitting him with sticks. Tetsuya curled up and covered his head with his hands, but the monsters also hit his hands. At that moment, it seemed to him that this was even greater pain. This time he definitely would not survive. Tears flowed from Tetsuya's eyes. Tetsuya covered his head with his hands and abrasions remained on his hands. He looked at the monsters just as they stopped hitting him. The monsters looked at Tetsuya and laughed. Tetsuya did not understand why they were laughing at him specifically. Tetsuya began to crawl and move away, but suddenly he reached the edge of a cliff. At the same time, he thought aloud that he was wounded. This is the first level, the body is very weak. Tetsuya looked into the abyss and decided that this was the only chance to break free. Tetsuya jerked his head forward into the abyss. He stretched his hands in front of him and shouted that he had to jump. Several monsters silently watched as Tetsuya fell. Later, the monsters rolled away from the edge of the abyss, and Tetsuya continued to fall and screamed loudly from fear. Partly Tetsuya was falling into the abyss. He screamed without stopping. Tetsuya, frightened, looked ahead. He noticed something. Tetsuya found himself at the bottom and fell into a dark, viscous liquid. Drops scattered in all directions, and Tetsuya's hands were spread out to the sides. The lower part of Tetsuya's body and his hands were covered with the dark liquid. He began to rise and said that he was actually alive. This liquid looked like mud and smelled terribly. After a few seconds of thought, Tetsuya turned his head and a scream burst from his mouth. Then he fell on his back and started to cry out loudly from fear. In front of him stood a large skull of a monster with big sharp fangs. The monster's skull was gigantic. Sharp fangs and horns protruded from it. Tetsuya looked at the monster's skull and said that it was actually a huge lizard. Tetsuya sat on the ground in the dark liquid. His face was scared. With a trembling voice, he said that this mud was part of the monster's body. Could it be that he survived only because of this? Next to Tetsuya, a vine plant appeared. Tetsuya sharply raised his head and saw one of the monsters sliding down the vine. He got to his feet and said that the monsters were coming after him. There was no way out of here. He had to figure out what to do next. Tetsuya turned to the huge monster skull, which he remembered thanks to his skill, and absorbed the body. Tetsuya said that this was right. He had to use his skill to stay alive. The monster fell to the ground. Tetsuya held out his hand in front of him and began to think about how to properly use his ability. The monster lunged at Tetsuya. From somewhere, a faint, unknown voice said that Tetsuya definitely wanted to capture this body. Tears streamed from Tetsuya's eyes and the voice stubbornly repeated the same phrase. Tetsuya did not know what to do, so he fearfully agreed to the unknown voice's proposal. In a moment, Tetsuya's hand began to absorb magic. Tetsuya's features started to grow exponentially. Everything froze, and a voice announced that the capture of Earth Dragon was successful. The giant monster skull disappeared and Tetsuya kept his hand in front of him. Then Tetsuya looked at his hands and said the skull had completely vanished and he felt something. Could this really be his skill? A goblin monster appeared in the air next to Tetsuya. Tetsuya noticed the monster approaching and began to turn back. In a moment, Tetsuya grabbed the monster by the head with his hand. Sweat streamed down Tetsuya's face and his teeth were clenched tightly. Tetsuya tightly squeezed the monster's head. It shuddered all over with fear. Tetsuya said he had become many times stronger than before. A little later, Tetsuya plunged his blade into the monster and knocked it to the ground. Shards of earth scattered in different directions. The monster lay on the ground motionless. Tetsuya looked around and began to talk about his unusual skill. Several goblins stood at the edge of the cliff talking and looking down. After a while, Tetsuya pushed off the ground and ended up next to them. In one leap, he grabbed one of the goblins by the head. The rest of the monsters got scared. Tetsuya landed on his feet near the rest of the monsters. The monsters whispered fearfully and looked at Tetsuya. Tetsuya turned to them, holding a captured goblin in his hand, blood dripping from his head. Tetsuya stretched out his hand in front of him and activated his ability. A magical cluster appeared in his palm, and the monster's body slowly began to disappear. Tetsuya's stats started to rise while the rest of the monsters froze and stood silently. Tetsuya looked ahead and activated ability level assessment. Characteristics appeared next to the goblins. The armed monster dodged to the side where Tetsuya was standing. Tetsuya did not move and spoke about how to raise his stats. An armed goblin intercepted Tetsuya and struck him. Tetsuya managed to raise his hands above his head and the goblin's weapon shattered into small fragments. The beast looked at Tetsuya in panic and Tetsuya looked back at him. In a moment, Tetsuya struck the monster. He punched through its head with his fist. Tetsuya looked at his hand. It was covered in blood and said that it all looked disgusting. Tetsuya stretched out his hand forward and magical symbols flashed before him. He began to cast a spell, and in a moment the meteorite crashed into the remaining monsters. The goblin's weapon flew aside and blood flowed from the monsters' bodies. Tetsuya stood by the meteorite, scratching the back of his head foolishly and insisting that he could probably increase the size of this stone if he leveled up the skill absorption of bodies. He said, was a very useful ability. Tetsuya took the monster in his hands and began to cast a spell. Tetsuya glanced at the hand with the dark vortex and said that without this skill it is very difficult to become stronger. As a first-level owner, he can strengthen himself. Next to Tetsuya, the groan indicators appeared. Tetsuya looked at his hand, where a dark clump of energy appeared. Then Tetsuya remembered the monster's skull and said he was lucky to find and absorb the monster's body. To survive, he needed to become stronger and take revenge on those who treated him that way. Tetsuya stood in the tunnel and a light flashed before him. His eerie shadow fell on the ground. Skulls and a large, wide-open eye appeared in the darkness. Tetsuya said the time for revenge had come. Above the huge chasm hung a clear, cloudless sky. From there came the loud cry of Tetsuya. He was rushing through the chasm and some creature was chasing him. Drops of sweat ran down Tetsuya's face and he thought that his class level had increased, but it was unfair. Tetsuya dashed with all his might, shouting that he did not know how strong this monster was and did not want to know how old it was. The vicious monster chased Tetsuya. Next to it appeared characteristics. It was a boar, 5 years old. The girl with dark hair and cat ears sat on Tetsuya's back. She smiled sweetly and her cheeks were slightly flushed. Next to the boy stood a table with Tetsuya's altered characteristics and abilities. The badger growled loudly, a horn protruded from its snout, it flared up, and Tetsuya's body was instantly pierced by a current. Tetsuya stopped, lowered his head, his body trembled from the shock. Tetsuya said his body was numb and he could not move. The lightning on the monster's horn went out and stopped flickering. The monster fiercely fixed its gaze on Tetsuya. Tetsuya said that this seemed to be the monster's true ability, it would soon die. The monster suddenly and quickly lunged toward where Tetsuya was standing. At full speed, the monster crashed into Tetsuya's back. Tetsuya froze in place, arms and legs spread to the sides. The blow raised dust into the air and splattered blood in all directions. Later, Tetsuya frowned. His face was covered in the monster's blood. He looked back and saw that the monster was lying on the ground and not moving. A moment passed and the monster's horn fell right on Tetsuya's head. Tetsuya opened his mouth in shock. Tetsuya looked at the monster, then approached the body and placed his hand on it. He crouched down and cast a spell to pull it in. The monster's body slowly disappeared and Tetsuya's stats increased. Tetsuya said he could not find a way out of this place. Tetsuya found himself in a small pool inside the cave. He dipped his hands into the water and began washing his face. Tetsuya thought that the skill of evaluation was still almost useless. Water ran down Tetsuya's cheek. He looked at his reflection in surprise and said that under such conditions he would fail and eventually die. Tetsuya recalled how he worked and played on the computer and thought that in the old world he worked for a shady company because of his passion for games. Because of this, he could not enter the college he chose, so he did not find a good job. Tetsuya remembered how the bandits stood before him and thought that he was already tired of doing the same job every day, but one day he came across the bandits and, because of them, ended up in this world. Tetsuya glanced at his hands and said miserably, "The worst thing in this new world is having a level 1 limit." Tetsuya stood at the edge of the pond and said that he could not die here. He had to be more careful. A cat appeared behind him and Tetsuya noticed it. Tetsuya looked at the cat and declared that it was definitely fine. The cat looked weak. The cat lay on the ground, then slowly pulled its paws toward Tetsuya. Tetsuya grabbed his head and said that next time he must be careful. Maybe the cat wanted to show him that he needed to look up. Some figure appeared on the ceiling. Tetsuya raised his head and saw a huge spider on the ceiling of the cave. Next to it appeared the stats. It was a first-year absorption spider. The monster had a special thread. Tetsuya carefully examined the face of the spider monster. The next moment the monster shot webbing where Tetsuya was standing. Tetsuya managed to raise his hands in front of him and cover his head from the blow. Tetsuya screamed from the sudden attack. Tetsuya began to lower his hands and looked at the web on his hand in fear. He did not understand what was happening, so he tried to tear his palm away from the sticky tendrils. Tetsuya gritted his teeth and tried with all his might to break free. Tetsuya's body began to tremble with fear. Drops of sweat ran down his face. Tetsuya held tightly to Putin and shouted that he could not break free in any way. The next moment Tetsuya felt that something was wrong. Tetsuya collapsed to the ground and the veins on his arms swelled. In panic, he thought that he was simply losing strength and his status had already begun to fade. Tetsuya looked at his stats. They were rapidly going down. Tetsuya sat on the ground and the veins on his arm kept swelling. Tetsuya gritted his teeth and stared ahead, then said that the monster really had the power of drying out. He could not tear the web off his arm. Tetsuya stood up, looked at the black cat, and said that probably this cat was also attacked by the spider. The spider still sat on the ceiling of the cave and did not let go of Tetsuya. Tetsuya looked at the monster, raised his hand above himself, and began to call out. Tetsuya said that the monster was far away, but he needed to defeat it with a meteor. In a moment, nothing happened. Tetsuya was stunned by what was happening. A magical sign appeared where the spider sat, but nothing happened. Tetsuya said that the ceiling was too low to use the meteor. Only then did Tetsuya remember how a boar with lightning attacked him and he got an idea. Tetsuya was all sweaty. He shouted that he needed to use this skill and then he would be able to defeat the spider. Tetsuya moved his hand aside, then pointed at the spider and struck it with lightning. The spider began to fall to the ground. The spider started jumping in different directions and Tetsuya did not stop and continued hitting the monster with lightning. Sweat poured down from Tetsuya like hail. Tetsuya stood on the ground and struck the monster. He said that the spider was incredibly fast, but the web still maintained the connection between Tetsuya and the spider. Tetsuya's face was sweaty and his stats kept falling. He stared strangely ahead and said that he urgently needed to come up with something because his mana was disappearing on useless attacks. Tetsuya's strength was running out. He glanced to the side and thought that this threat might conduct electricity. If so, then before his mana ran out, he needed to try something else. Tetsuya lowered his hands down and began to cast a spell. He said that this should save him. Then Tetsuya clenched his hand into a fist and gritted his teeth. He activated the ability and a current discharge passed through the web. The discharge hit the spider exactly. The spider sank down. Tetsuya broke free from the web. Suddenly he started running towards the spider lying on his back. The spider felt his run and flipped over. Tetsuya jumped up and ended up right above the spider. The spider, in fear, looked at Tetsuya. He hovered in the air. In the next moment, Tetsuya landed so that his legs dug right into the spider. He froze on the spider and began to insist that the spider must die. It seemed the spider was in bad shape, but it was very fast. Spider blood splashed onto Tetsuya's leg. Tetsuya frowned. He looked at the crushed spider, then activated his ability and began absorbing the monster's remains. Tetsuya remembered the cat and reached out his hand to it. Tetsuya thanked the cat for the warning about the danger. Tetsuya took the black cat in his arms and said it looked weak. He needed to figure out what to do next. Maybe the kitty just wanted a little drink. Then Tetsuya dipped his hand into a nearby pond. Tetsuya scooped some water into his palm and gave the cat a drink. The cat slowly began to lap. Tetsuya stroked its head and said he hoped the cat would feel better soon. Tetsuya sat by the shore of the small pond. Tetsuya closed his eyes and said the cat had such soft fur it was pleasant to pet it. But just then the cat's tail puffed up and began touching Tetsuya's face. Tetsuya looked down. Fearfully, the cat was no longer there and the tail had grown even bigger. Tetsuya opened his mouth in surprise and shouted fearfully. Instead of the cat in his arms was a dark-haired girl. She was drinking water from Tetsuya's palm. She had large cat ears sticking out on her head and also a long tail. The unknown girl held Tetsuya's palm in her hands and continued licking it. Water dripped down his arm and he kept making sounds and getting scared. Tetsuya pulled his hand out of the girl's embrace and thundered that she needed to stop because he did not understand her actions. The girl stuck out her tongue and declared that Tetsuya must give her more water. Tetsuya looked at the girl fearfully but did not understand where his own fear came from. The girl raised her hands, looked at them, her cheeks flushed, and a smile appeared on her face. She began to say that she had returned to her form. A dark ribbon was tied around the girl's neck. The girl took Tetsuya's hand, closed her eyes, and said she was grateful to him for the help. Sweat ran down Tetsuya's face. He looked at the girl fearfully and began to tell her to stop. The girl released Tetsuya's hand and with a smile began to say that her name was Linia and that she was grateful to Tetsuya for the help. Next to her appeared a table with characteristics. She was 15 years old and she belonged to the Beastmen. Tetsuya closed his eyes and nervously ran through the thought that the girl's name was Lenya and the cat was a real beast. An unusual atmosphere immediately arose around Tetsuya. Lenya asked Tetsuya what his name was. Tetsuya nervously smiled and began to say that she could call him Tetsuya Takahashi. The girl raised her hands up and began to wave them. Then, smiling, she said that she was pleased to meet Tetsuya. Tetsuya thought that the girl was okay, although before that she looked rather weak. Lenya waved her finger aside and shouted that Tetsuya was incredible. He even managed to defeat a spider. Tetsuya stood behind the girl and nervously scratched his face. Lenya looked ahead and said in surprise that Tetsuya needed to explain what he was doing in this dangerous place. Tetsuya thoughtfully rubbed the back of his head and began to answer that he had many reasons, but did Lenya know how to get out of this place? Lenya stood on one leg in front of Tetsuya. Stone icicles hung around the boys. After thinking a little, Lenya said that Tetsuya really did not know how to get out of here. She did not remember how she ended up here and realized she had simply ended up in a cavity. After a pause, Lenya again repeated that with Tetsuya's permission she could help him. Tetsuya rubbed the back of his head and pondered, how could the girl have ended up in such a place? Lenya raised her hand and smiling said that maybe Tetsuya still wanted to ask something. She was ready to answer any question because Tetsuya was her savior. Tetsuya suddenly opened his eyes wide and interest flashed in them. Tetsuya broke the silence and said that he had one question he wanted to ask Lenya. Lenya began to move her ears. She raised her hands with her fingers and pointed to her ears, saying that beastmen also have ears and they are very cute. Tetsuya pointed to his ear and said that he meant something else. Such ears are found on humans, maybe on beastmen too. Having glanced at the question, Lenya froze with a strange expression on her face. Then she pressed her reddened face with her palms and let out a silent scream. Lenya continued to hold her hands on her red face, turned away from Tetsuya and shouted that she really heard it from Tetsuya. Tetsuya is very strange. As soon as he heard Lenya's words, Tetsuya suddenly frowned, surprise sparkled in his eyes and sweat flowed down his face. Tetsuya jerked his hand to the side where Lenya was sitting and said that maybe this question was considered bad. Lenya sat down on the floor, pressed her hands to her red face, and cried out that it was a secret he should not ask her about. Tetsuya sharply clasped his hands and began to say that he really did not know. He asks Lenya for forgiveness. The girl sat on the ground and covered her head with her hands. Her face was still very red. Lenya's body trembled and she continued to cover her face with her hands. The girl looked at Tetsuya and said that he definitely was not lying. Tears appeared in Lenya's eyes. The girl stood up and said that she was sorry for the scream, but she was still grateful to Tetsuya for saving her. Tetsuya replied that she should not worry so much. Lenya thoughtfully rubbed her chin and took Tetsuya's hands. Lenya took Tetsuya's hand and pulled him along. Her face flushed with a blush and she said that they were heading to her house. She wanted to introduce Tetsuya to her teacher. Tetsuya and Lenya walked hand in hand through the cave. Tetsuya asked about Lenya's teacher. The girl replied that her teacher was a great person. Lenya's words slightly surprised Tetsuya. Meanwhile, in another part of the cave, a stone stood leaning against the wall. It was different from the others. Behind the wall, someone's voice sounded. How am I supposed to calm down if I don't know where Lenya is? It's very dangerous there at night. In bright light appeared a black silhouette with sharp fangs. An unknown voice continued to say that she better apologize when she returns. He hoped it would not drag on. A lizard-like monster sat in the corner of the cave. Under it spread a large puddle of dark liquid. The boys watched the monster through a crack. The boys peeked out from behind the stone and looked at the monster. Tetsuya looked at Lenya and said that they definitely needed to go here. The boys looked at each other and Linen replied that they needed to go through here to get home. Tetsuya agreed with the girl, and the lizard monster was eating from the dark, bubbling liquid. Tetsuya said the lizard looked scary. Lenya's eyes lit up and she said that Tetsuya had nothing to fear, he should rely on her. Tetsuya replied distrustfully that Lenya had no effective skills. Lenya clenched her hands into fists and was moving them, then said she would just hit the monster. Tetsuya responded with displeasure, hitting is not a skill. The lizard slid through the boiling liquid, then the monster looked aside, something was sticking out of its mouth. The boys talked about needing to come up with another way to defeat the monster because it secretes poison, very dangerous. Tetsuya peeked out from behind a rock and said they must avoid a fight at all costs. Maybe Lenya knows another way home. Lenya placed her hands on the rock and looked at Tetsuya, then said that if you look at it, there must be only one way out. Above the gorge, the sky began to darken. Lenya was already pulling that night would soon come and scary monsters would appear any moment, so she does not go out at night. Tetsuya looked away and said he did not want to meet such monsters. Lenya looked away and spoke, if they can defeat the lizard, the way home will be much easier. The boys imagined how exactly the monster attacks. Lenya said the risk of the lizard's attack was small, but it still existed. Tetsuya scratched the back of his head, opened the stats, and said they needed to understand which skill to use. The lizard was level 14, so it could attack with a meteor, but all its strength had gone to fighting the spider. Tetsuya ran his finger over the skill screen and said that the lightning strike only neutralizes the enemy regardless of whether it manages to weaken it with the web. Lenya peeked out from behind the rock. Tetsuya closed his eyes and put his hand on his chin. Lenya turned to Tetsuya confusedly when he said she would definitely manage with her skills and speed. The lizard, tongue out, turned aside where Lenya was standing and she began to say that she had outrun the lizard, so it should look here. Lenya started spinning in front of the lizard and teasing it. The monster turned to the girl. Then Lenya suddenly started running and the monster ran after her. Lenya turned around and said that the monster was too slow. If he kept running like that, he would never catch up and eat her. Lenya stared ahead, where the cave narrowed. Under Lenya's foot lay a stone. She stumbled and fell face down to the ground. Lenya remained lying like that. She tried to pull herself up and whispered that she was in pain. The monster ran to where the girl lay. Tetsuya shouted Lenya's name. Tetsuya was in the air above the sloth and the lizard that was rushing at the girl. He himself was on the ground. Suddenly, he caught Lenya in his arms. The monster wanted to strike, but Tetsuya managed to dodge. The lizard was caught in the web he had just created. The lizard was completely stuck to the web, still trying to swing its tail. Tetsuya looked at the monster's face and said that the web really worked. Tetsuya held Lenya in his arms and with the other hand grabbed the web and pulled it toward himself. The boys stood on a small hill. Tetsuya said that thanks to Lenya everything worked out, so now they had to wait until he could use the meteorite. Tetsuya clenched his palm into a fist and there was the web. The skill icon with a star was almost finished. Tetsuya said that it was too slow, the mana absorption only reached the first level. Liquid began to pour out of the monster's body, causing the webbing to start breaking apart. Tetsuya nervously said that it was dangerous. The webbing was slowly tearing. The monster almost freed itself from the webbing, but at that moment it opened its mouth wide and shot poison where the boys stood. Before this happened, Tetsuya thought to strike with lightning. No, it was useless because they were in a swampy area. The poison was near the boys, so Lenya would not be affected. Tetsuya covered her with his body. The poison hit Tetsuya in the back. Lenya called Tetsuya in fear, then looked at his back. Corrosive liquid had hit there. Tetsuya's t-shirt was torn and a wound appeared on his skin. Tetsuya grinned and said that everything was fine. A magical symbol appeared above the monster. Tetsuya covered his body with curses and sat down. The monster opened its mouth wide and loomed over the boys. Tetsuya said that they had already endured long enough. Tetsuya pressed Lenya with his body. The monster did not manage to strike. The next moment, it was knocked away by a stone that appeared. Tetsuya stood up and pressed Lenya against himself. Tetsuya moved his hand aside and cast a spell. The meteorite crushed the lizard and dust rose into the air from the impact. Tetsuya looked at the wounded monster with satisfaction, and Lenya opened her mouth in surprise. Lenya began to hug Tetsuya and shout that they had done it, that Tetsuya was the best. Tetsuya flinched, sweat ran down his face, and then he said that what was happening now was very dangerous. Tetsuya touched his head, tired after the fight. Lenya ran behind and rejoiced at the victory. Tetsuya jumped off the big mushroom and headed to the lizard. Tetsuya told Lenya to calm down. The lizard's paw had been torn off by the blow. Tetsuya sat down and stretched his hand across the lizard's body, then began to cast a spell and restore his energy reserves. Lenya stood behind and carefully watched Tetsuya's actions. Tetsuya touched his head and sighed heavily. After that, he began to empty out and said that he was interested in what would happen if he absorbed something, because his ability allowed him to gain skills from bodies. Tetsuya approached the mushroom and broke off a piece, saying it was worth trying to eat. Lenya stood behind and watched Tetsuya. These were bubble mushrooms and they have deadly poisonous venom. Tetsuya began to eat the mushroom and one of his abilities grew. Tetsuya said that the taste of the poisonous mushroom was not so bad. Lenya screamed in fear. Her teacher had ordered not to eat anything from caves. Lenya grabbed Tetsuya's face with her hands and wanted to make him spit out the remains of the mushroom. Tetsuya laughed at Lenya's prank. In the next moment, an incredible roar sounded. The boys looked around fearfully. The moon appeared in the sky. Something began to take shape behind them. The boys sharply turned back, terrified. The boys opened their mouths in fear, drops of sweat rolling down their faces. Above the gorge appeared a concentrated ball of energy. Skulls were visible through it. It was the spirit of death, a 100-year-old lonely spirit that appears in the valley of death. The boys sobbed from the scream. The boys looked up in fear and began to discuss the next plan of action. Lenya picked up a stone from the ground and threw it upward. The stone hit one of the spirit's skulls. Lenya crossed her arms. Tetsuya was outraged by her action. Then the boys ran as fast as they could and the spirit chased after them. Lenya shouted that they should run to her house, but they could be caught. Tetsuya, turned by sudden horror, saw several skulls chasing them. Lenya stopped, grabbed the bandage hanging on her thigh and pulled it. Lenya activated the ability to transform. Before that, she said she was too tired, but there was no choice left. Lenya turned into a big black cat and growled. Tetsuya did not slow down and coarse dust rose into the air around the boys. Lenya ran alongside Tetsuya in a cloud of cats. She looked at him and said that Tetsuya needed to sit on her back, then they would get home faster. Tetsuya did not immediately believe that Lenya was capable of turning into a cat. Tetsuya climbed onto Lenny's back and Lenny looked at him and said he must hold on tight. The pair almost broke away from the chase. Tetsuya said that Lenny was probably faster than the spirit of death. They continued running along the gorge. A noise echoed in the gorge. Lenya and Tetsuya turned around, then reached the small door in the rock. Tetsuya climbed down from Lenya and said it looked like a dead end. Lenya replied, "There is a hidden door there." Lenya, having disappeared into the cloud of cats, reached the secret door and began scratching it, and this went on for some time. Then Lenya stopped and said in a hoarse voice, "She cannot open the door." Tetsuya smiled and said that Lenya should return to her form. Lenya blushed and replied that it was a good idea. Dust rose into the air and then Lenya fell to the ground and said that she was very tired. Tetsuya lifted Lenya in his arms. She said that the transformation is very exhausting. Tetsuya must carry her to the door and she will open it. Lenya pressed her paw to the door and a handle appeared on it. Tetsuya continued to hold Lenya in his arms and wondered if these were really sliding doors. He put Lenya down and began to open the door slowly, step by step. Lenya said it would be difficult. Tetsuya must be careful. The boys entered the room. There was light. Plates and mugs stood on the table. Tetsuya held Lenya in his arms and said that this place really felt like home. Tetsuya was very frightened when he saw a black, toothy shadow on the floor, so she also began to scream that she knew what time it was. A small bear appeared in front of Tetsuya. He crossed his arms and said with displeasure that he had already warned Lenya, "It is dangerous outside at night." Tetsuya held Lenya in his arms and wondered if there really was a teddy bear in front of him, and it was even talking. Miss Ka began to shout angrily about what a man was doing in their house and what he wanted from Lenya. Lenya continued to sit in Tetsuya's embrace. Then Miss Ka rushed forward and shouted that Tetsuya should be silent and let Lenya go. Tetsuya was frightened. The bear ended up on Tetsuya's shoulder and began hitting him on the head. At the same time, Miss Ka declared that Lenya was a member of his family. Tetsuya said with annoyance that the bear had to stop and then he would let Lenya go. Tetsuya put Lenya on the floor. Miss Ka grabbed Lenya and took her aside. Then Miss Ka stood in front of Lenya, who was lying on the floor exhausted, and said that Tetsuya was here because there was nothing valuable in their house. Tetsuya stood aside and touched his head. Tetsuya raised his hands and said that he did not want anything from them. Lenya lay on her side. Miss Ka began to shout that maybe Tetsuya wanted to mock them because people like to wish with such animals. Tetsuya did not understand what the bear was talking about. Lenya pulled her paw toward the bear and said that he had to stop because Tetsuya really helped her. The bear was surprised by the girl's words. The man sat at the table and Miss Ka began to say that he was sorry for his behavior and also grateful that they saved Lenya. Tetsuya looked at the animals and thought how interesting it was which exact breed of beast man looked like a scarecrow. Miss Ka looked at Tetsuya in surprise. He activated his ability and saw the bear's features. It was an elf named Mek Samafares. She was 81 years old. The guys began to discuss the assessment skill. Tetsuya did not know that this skill was rare. He raised his hand and a magic sign appeared in the air. Mek frowned and said that Tetsuya had to say who he really was. Tetsuya looked at Mek in fear. Mek closed her eyes and said she was surprised. There must be a reason after all. Now she was indebted to Tetsuya. Mek stood up and put her paws on her waist. Then she said that she was Samofer Mek. Her appearance was like that because of a curse, but in reality she was an elf. Tetsuya looked at the animals and thought, without assessment it would be hard to believe. Mek, she looks proud. Mek pointed to her chest and said that it was a sign of hospitality so Tetsuya could spend the night here. Tetsuya smiled in response and replied that he would like to know how to get out of this place. Mek was surprised to hear Tetsuya's words. Tetsuya, hearing Mek's words, imagined various monsters. She said that to reach the exit it would take 30 days. There is another exit, but it is guarded by a powerful golem. Lenya raised her paw and declared that she and Tetsuya could try to defeat the golem. Mek scratched her head and replied that Lenya's proposal was doubtful. Lenya looked at Tetsuya and said that he must show Mek his status. Tetsuya pondered whether he could really show his status to others. Mek, during a pause, grabbed the stats board from Tetsuya. Going through all the indicators, she screamed at the first level, "What kind of crazy status is this?" Mek held the table in her hands and began to insist that Tetsuya was incredible thanks to her skills. She had heard about body absorption for the first time. Tetsuya spread his arms and said that this ability allows her to increase statuses. Lenya sat on her lap. Tetsuya, surprised, scratched his face and listened carefully to Mek. She said that if Tetsuya could raise his stats, he could defeat the golem. Mek and Lenya stood on the chip while Tetsuya awkwardly waved the sword. A ribbon appeared on Mek's head and she began to shout that Tetsuya had never held a sword in his life. Tetsuya was weak and lived only in peace, but she would teach him everything. Later, several goblins appeared in the cave. They looked surprised at the place where the noise came from. Mek constantly insisted that Tetsuya also needed combat experience. He had to defeat the goblins with a wooden sword. Tetsuya stood before the goblins holding the sword above himself. Then he said that the goblins looked weak. He squeezed his eyelids and continued, "The enemy will not spare you if Tetsuya does not take up the sword, he will not survive." Just a moment passed. Tetsuya opened his eyes and stabbed one of the goblins with the sword. Tetsuya's mouth opened in surprise. Tetsuya continued swinging the sword in different directions and hitting the goblins. Mech began to shout that Tetsuya was holding the sword incorrectly. It seemed that Tetsuya had never fought in battle. Tetsuya began absorbing the bodies of monsters and said that there was no point in training when he could raise his stats with his ability. Mech stated that Tetsuya's skills must improve. Tetsuya grabbed the sword and looked at Mech. Lanya listened carefully to Mech. Mech said that it was important to be able to control one's abilities. Tetsuya must relax and trust her. Tetsuya nervously thought that the most important thing was to have skills. Lanya happily clapped her hands. Lenya began throwing at himself and admiring the fur with delight. The fur hung in the air and said that power can be mastered after reaching a certain level. Tetsuya looked at the girls in surprise. Mech seriously said, once you reach this level, you can destroy an entire nation. Hearing Mech's words, Tetsuya got scared and asked how powerful a child with level 125 would be. Mech replied that it was nonsense. Meanwhile, the bandits who came to this world with Tetsuya stood on the corpses of the defeated monsters and smiled. Night fell, the boys returned home. Tetsuya was in a hot bath and Mech and Lenya were preparing dinner. Tetsuya lay in the bath and thought, this house is too cozy. Who was Mech really? Tetsuya raised his hand and began to call out. But suddenly he thought, he had already learned a lot from the mecha, from how to control magic to how to fight, and the limit of such a level is pure madness. He wondered if he would have to meet those bandits again. Tetsuya raised his hand and almost completely submerged in the water. Silently aloud, he wondered how many bodies he would have to absorb to preserve their power. What should he do next? Water splashed on the floor and a person appeared in the room. Tetsuya completely dived underwater, opened his eyes and saw that Lanya was holding him. She raised her fingers and smiled sweetly. Tetsuya flinched from surprise and began to release air from his mouth. Tetsuya emerged from the water and began screaming wildly that it was really Lenya. And what was she even doing here? The girl poked her ears out from under the water, then came out completely. Lenya's face was wet and slightly red. Suddenly, Mech rushes into the bathroom. He is wearing an apron and a chef's hat. Mech starts shouting about the noise happening here. Tetsuya tried to justify himself, but Lenya cut him off. She just wanted to take a bath before dinner. Mech replied that there was no point in making a fuss. Tetsuya was surprised by such an answer. Lin invited Mech to the bath as well. Mech took off her apron and froze in a funny pose. Tetsuya, Lenya, and Mech found themselves in the bath. The girls were enjoying the warm water while Tetsuya had a displeased look. The girls came out of the bath. Mech took a sponge and began to lather herself. After a while, Mech was covered in foam. Mech covered himself with foam and began rubbing Lenya's back. Lenya said enthusiastically that it was really wonderful, and Tetsuya thought discontentedly, what the hell is he even looking at? Lenya looked at Tetsuya. She spread her arms and smiled. Tetsuya can come here too, will wipe his back. Tetsuya shouted that everything was fine as it was. Mech looked at Tetsuya in surprise. Tetsuya looked away and blushed, then awkwardly scratched his head. Lenya said that if Tetsuya kept sitting there, the water would cool down quickly. Tetsuya sat opposite Lenny. When she saw the scar on his back, she immediately trembled with fear. Tetsuya replied that it was just a small scar from a poisonous lizard. Lenya trembled and began rubbing Tetsuya's back, whispering incessantly that she was very sorry for what had happened. Tetsuya laughed and replied that she had nothing to worry about. Lenya rubbed Tetsuya's back with a cute fur. The fur began to say that Tetsuya could really be trusted now he had become a member of their family. Tetsuya frowned, surprised by Mech's words. He looked back and Lenya asked for help washing her hair. Tetsuya nervously agreed to help the girl. Tetsuya reached out to touch Lenya's head. She covered her face and screamed loudly that Tetsuya had just tried to touch her ears. Mech covered Lenya with a paw, protecting her. Tetsuya held his hands in the air and Mech kept shouting that people cannot be trusted. Tetsuya replied that girls do not tell the truth, he just did not know what was appropriate here. In the dark sky, the moon shone brightly. Tetsuya and Mech watched the fire. Mech said that Tetsuya had not been here for a long time. It seemed he was already ready to meet the golem. Lenya stood in front of a monster resembling a wolf and teased it. Mech then said that Tetsuya's victory over this monster and his training would soon end. Before the boys stood a monster, a fire weasel. She was 10 years old and she was a fire demon. Tetsuya drew his sword in front of him and said that this would be his last trial. The sword replied that Tetsuya was strong enough to easily defeat the monster. The burning monster rushed towards Tetsuya, stopped, and opened its jaws. A fireball shot out of its mouth. Tetsuya dashed towards the fireball. Tetsuya managed to dodge the attack. At that moment, Mech continued to support Tetsuya with words. The sword said that Tetsuya must finish the fight with one strike. The next moment, Tetsuya leapt up and swung, delivering a devastating blow to the fire monster, which screamed in pain. Tetsuya stood before the fallen monster. Mech jumped down from the cliff and said that Tetsuya did a great job and it was expected because he was her student. Tetsuya reached for the monster's body, but Mech stopped him. The fire monster broke free and flew into the air. Tetsuya began to cover his head with his palm. Tetsuya shouted for Mech to get away. Mech managed to jump aside. Mech sat on the ground and said in a frightened voice that this thing was actually still alive. A fireball with a terrifying face was flying towards where Mech was sitting. Tetsuya stood before Mech and the monster charged and crashed into his hands. Sweat appeared on Tetsuya's face as he struggled to hold back the monster. Tetsuya grabbed the monster by the head and gritted his teeth, then activated an acid attack. The monster's head began to melt and its body stretched out on the ground. Smoke rose from Tetsuya's hands. He looked down in fear and tried to breathe deeply. Mech rushed to Tetsuya. She was afraid for his condition. Tetsuya said that everything was fine, he was just a little overheated. Lena appeared, dragging the carcass of a wolf-like monster in her arms. She ran up to Tetsuya and said that she had brought this monster specifically for him. The guys were at home. Tetsuya lay on the bed and Mech sat at the table. They began discussing that tomorrow they would say goodbye to this house. Mech found a way to remove the curse from herself and what exactly Tetsuya would do when they left here. Tetsuya looked up at the ceiling and replied that he had not thought about it yet. He intended to become stronger and then show his power to those people who did not believe him. Linnea entered the house in the form of a cat. The boys continued discussing Tetsuya's revenge on his offenders. Linnea jumped onto the sofa and began climbing onto Tetsuya under his t-shirt. Lenya reached her hand under Tetsuya's t-shirt and peeked out from the collar. Tetsuya reproached her, saying he had already told Lenya to stay away from there. Tetsuya remembered how Lenya transformed into a human while sitting under his t-shirt. Tetsuya expressed dissatisfaction about this. Lenya replied that she liked this place and would not listen to Tetsuya. Mech sat at the table and looked at the boys. She began to feel touched and said that those boys were like a father and daughter. Lenya began stroking Tetsuya's face with her paws. Tetsuya decided that he was still too young to have a daughter who was already 15. Mech said she could become a mother to Lenya. Tetsuya was embarrassed by this news. Mech pondered this question. Mech imagined herself in a wedding dress with a bouquet, then said she would not mind marrying Tetsuya. Tetsuya thought it would be strange if his wife became a soft toy. Lenia looked strangely ahead. The boys continued discussing their marital status. Mech began to get irritated because she did not want to become a grandmother. Lenia climbed out of her t-shirt and asked, "When they leave the valley, will they continue to communicate?" Mech froze in a strange pose. Mech leaned against the bed and said she would not leave Lenia. She could not leave Lenia alone, and she could not abandon Tetsuya either. Tears appeared in Lenia's eyes, and Tetsuya lay with his eyes closed. Mech climbed onto the bed and said she still had a bunch of things she had to explain to the boys. Lenya and Mech looked pleadingly at Tetsuya. Tetsuya began stroking Lenya and said he could not leave the girls even if he was confident in his abilities. Lenya started to agree with Tetsuya's words. She added that when she felt good and happy, she wanted to sleep. Tetsuya and Lenya wished each other good night. Mech sat next to her. She sighed heavily and said that Lenya was a lazy girl. Tetsuya fell asleep. Mech began examining his wounded arm, then said that Tetsuya hid a scar from her because he didn't want her to worry. Mech took Tetsuya's hand and said that she needed to be more careful. She deeply regretted that Tetsuya got hurt because of her. Behind Maka, her true form appeared. She did not take her eyes off Tetsuya and said she would be responsible for all his scars because he was her favorite student. Mech revealed her true form. She was adorned with jewelry and a beautiful flower bloomed in her hair. Mech squeezed Tetsuya's hand and thought that from now on she would always be by his side. The next day, a splash echoed in one of the caves. In a moment, someone attacked the monster's head. Tetsuya absorbed the remains of the monster and said that his condition was bad. After absorbing goblins, he did not become stronger. A table with his stats appeared next to Tetsuya. Lenya looked carefully at something, then moved toward Tetsuya. Mech began to say that it wasn't so bad, soon Tetsuya would be able to fight the golem. Tetsuya held his sword on his shoulder. Lenya made it up on the spot. She raised her hands up and loudly declared that they could take Tetsuya to the cemetery and make him stronger. Mech introduced the monsters and began to protest. Lenya clasped her fingers together and tried to justify herself. The guys started chatting about the bodies of dead monsters. Mech folded her hands together and began shouting that she had never cleaned a body, and in general she set the rules herself. Lenya was furious with anger, and the light was already flickering from the cave. The guys entered through the entrance, and right in front of them was a monster. A giant golem. He was 33 years old, a stone giant monster, in his chest a dark hole. The monster sat to the side and was busily doing something. Loud sounds rolled throughout the cave. Then he looked where the guys were standing. Tetsuya nervously coughed. Mech froze between his legs, then folded her hands together and said she knew exactly how to defeat this giant monster. Tetsuya held the sword in front of him and froze in a battle stance. Lenya began to smile and adjust her gloves. Mech said it was time to get out of here. Lenya said that if the guys were ready, because her animal form would disappear in 10 minutes, so the monster began to move towards them. Tetsuya held the sword in his hands. Lenya stood in front of him and Mech sat on her. The guys were serious. They rushed forward. The monster clenched its hand into a fist and began to swing, but its blow was stopped by the ground. The guys landed on the soil before the monster could hit. They managed to jump aside. The monster activated an attack. A fierce explosion thundered, throwing the guys into the air. Tetsuya was surprised by such a strong blow. Mech grumbled with dissatisfaction that the monster was not an easy opponent and it would be difficult for them to deal with it. The guys landed on their feet. Tetsuya's hair fluttered in the wind. They looked at the monster and Mech said they needed to destroy the red sphere embedded in its chest. Tetsuya raised his hand and began to cast a spell. Tetsuya launched an attack with a fireball. The monster stretched out its hand in front of it and the fireball crashed into it with a roar. The monster did not even feel Tetsuya's attack. Tetsuya said that there was not a scratch left on the monster, and Mech replied that the monster was well protected. The monster began to clench its fist and pressed its chest. Mech said that the monster's weak spot was its core. A magical symbol flashed above the monster's head, but Tetsuya could not strike because of the low ceiling. Lenya began to dig the ground. Tetsuya raised his hand and began to cast a spell. Lenya opened her mouth wide and rushed forward. Mech said that the guys had to weaken the monster's defense to reach the core. Tetsuya began to attack the monster from all sides. Clouds of smoke rose into the air. Lenya rushed towards the monster. The monster noticed Lenya approaching. Lenius began licking her paw and muttering that she did not feel like the monster was harmed by her attacks, although she tried her best. The monster constantly watched the guys. The next moment the monster lunged at Lenya. She managed to dodge. The monster watched her and struck again, and Lenya skillfully closed the distance with each of its attacks. Lenya jumped in different directions and each time pulled away from the blows. She looked at the monster and began to tease it, hovering right above its head. The monster sharply swiped its paw in her direction. At that moment, Tetsuya began swinging his sword. Tetsuya appeared next to the monster and delivered a powerful blow, but he missed. A barrier flashed between him and the monster. The guys gaped in amazement. They never thought the golem could activate a defense. The monster clasped its hands and began waving them. Mech shouted, "First, we need to destroy the monster's head. It controls the barrier." Shortly after, the monster lowered its hands and slammed them onto the ground with all its might. A gigantic explosion thundered, so strong that the mech was thrown into the air and it landed among the shattered stones. Tetsuya and Lenya had disappeared somewhere. They were not visible. Mech broke free from under the rubble and shouted, checking if all the boys were okay. Lenya was found under the rubble and Mech began pulling her out. A terrifying silhouette of a golem appeared next to the girls. Lenya began to scream wildly that the monster was behind Mech. Mech looked up and saw a huge golem foot looming over them, slowly but steadily moving straight towards them. The golem's legs stopped moving and he was sharply surprised. Mech shuddered and closed her eyes in fear. Lenya called Tetsuya's name. Mech opened her eyes and raised her head. Tetsuya stood over her and held back the golem's leg. Tetsuya clenched the golem's leg. A magical sign appeared above him. Tetsuya released a fireball towards the rubble to free Lenny. Lenny from Mecha was blown away by the shockwave. Mecha got up and began touching his head. The golem's leg landed on the ground, dust rose around, and Mac fearfully rushed to the golem's leg, shouting for it to take the leg away. Mac fiercely beat the golem's leg. The golem's leg began to crumble, and this greatly surprised Mech. She looked down and saw liquid leaking from under the golem's foot. Tetsuya said that Mech must leave. Suddenly, a huge magical sign flared up under the golem's foot. Gradually, Tetsuya raised the golem's leg above himself. Its body was covered in black liquid. Tetsuya activated the ability Acid Bullet. Tetsuya himself knocked the golem's leg out with a strike, and from it came a pungent steam. The monster fell to the ground, and Max, standing to the side with his mouth agape in shock, shouted that the distance between the ceiling and the monster had increased. Tetsuya began to fall to the ground. Mech lunged forward and shouted that this was their chance. Tetsuya froze motionless in the black liquid. Tetsuya felt himself losing consciousness. Mech looked up and said, "If the core is not destroyed, the monster will recover." Mech looked at Tetsuya fearfully. He was lying still. She shifted her gaze to the golem and rushed to run along its arm, then jumped and flew straight to the monster's head. Max sat on the monster's head and looked at Tetsuya, after which she shouted that Tetsuya must throw the meteor where he could hear her voice, and then they could get out of this valley. Tetsuya twitched one finger. Mech first felt something above her. Mech looked up, opened her mouth, and fear seized her. A large shadow began to descend on Mech. Above Mech and the monster hung a huge meteor. Mech managed to take off and slip away, and she began to scream wildly from fear. The dome around the monster's core began to crumble. Mech shouted that the line could hit right now. In a moment, the monster's body began to tear apart. An explosion. Dust rose into the air. The line made an attack and a huge explosion sounded. Everything was covered with dust. Mech sat aside and rocks began to fall around. Tetsuya lay motionless on the ground, then lifted a stone. Lenia ran up to Mech and said that the monster was dead. Mech replied that she had ridden everything she could. The monster's body began to disappear. The girls looked up in surprise and said that Tetsuya looked great. Tetsuya began to absorb the monster's body. Tetsuya sat on the ground and gathered strength. Casting a spell, his stats gradually increased. Tetsuya's clothes were torn into small pieces. Mech approached Tetsuya and said that he was very grateful to her. They really managed to win. The guys thanked each other. Tetsuya lay down on the ground and Lenya lay next to him and said that the work was finally done. Tetsuya looked at Line and said that she did well finishing off the monster. Line replied that it was thanks to Tetsuya. Mech rolled up to the guys and began to support them. Line said that it would have been easier if Mech knew the monster's weak spots. Tetsuya stood up and declared that they had won, and that was the main thing. Mech hid behind Tetsuya and covered her face with her hands. Doors appeared in the rock, then opened. The guys began to rejoice both at the doors themselves and at the fact that they could leave this valley. Mech heard a strange sound. In the darkness behind the door, something flashed and a hand appeared. Someone in black armor came out of the darkness and addressed the boys. The boys were very shocked by the stranger who appeared. The stranger in armor moved toward the boys. Tetsuya crouched and began shielding the girls with his hand. Tetsuya had no idea what kind of creature this was. Mech could not use her ability on the stranger. Tetsuya was in a military uniform with a weapon in his hands. He held a sword right in front of him. Nearby stood girls in luxurious outfits. Mech was in her two forms and held a staff in her hands. Mech grabbed Lenya and said that Tetsui's analysis also wouldn't work against this opponent, just as Tetsui wouldn't be able to defeat him if the stranger were level 100. Tetsuya sat down and stared at the stranger. Then it clicked in his head. He needed to find a way out of this situation. It seemed the stranger was not an enemy at all. He could try talking to him. Jack was holding Lenya in her arms and looking at Tetsuya. The stranger extended his hand to Tetsui, and he immediately said they did not need extra trouble. Tetsuya was very surprised when the stranger pulled out a can. Mech held Lenya and started shouting that everything looked too suspicious and Tetsuya must not relax. Tetsuya hesitantly reached out to the stranger. Mech looked at Tetsuya in fear. She did not understand what he wanted to do. A drop of sweat ran down Tetsui's face. He touched the stranger and said that his actions were very similar to finger fight. Tetsui's t-shirt was completely torn. Mech helped Lenia and resorted to a scuffle, pressed her fingers. Tetsuya still held the stranger's hand and replied that it was a game where players compete with their fingers. Linnea began to laugh and said, "Doesn't Mech know about such a game?" Mech began to circle around Linnea and shout that she knew everything and maybe Linnea doubted her abilities. Tetsuya thought about it. How could Mech not know about that? In Tetsuya's pose, the mecha continued to circle around Lenny. Tetsuya still thought the mecha didn't know the simplest things, but she was not stupid. Perhaps such a game really did not exist in this world. Suddenly, Tetsuya began to rage furiously. Tetsuya looked down and saw that the stranger in armor had snatched Itan. Tetsuya twitched with surprise. At that moment, a dark hole appeared from which bony hands began to emerge. Skeletons began to emerge from the darkness that appeared in the floor, stretching out and grabbing Tetsuya's hand. Drops of sweat appeared on his face from fear. The skeletons held Tetsuya's hand and lowered him deep into the darkness. Then suddenly Tetsuya was left all alone in the void. After a moment, a huge eye appeared before him and looked at him. The figure of a stranger in armor flashed right in front of Tetsuya. He approached his face and said that Tetsuya must resist. Tetsuya's face darkened. After some time, Tetsuya woke up and began gasping for air. Nearby, the girl's screams could be heard. They were calling him. Tetsuya stood up and understood nothing. Mech began shouting that Tetsuya was fine, the stranger had disappeared, and the doors in the rock were empty. Tetsuya's hand began to flicker, and then a strange mark appeared on it, but after a moment this marker disappeared from Tetsuya's hand. Mech began to guess what this symbol was. Tetsuya raised his hand almost to his face and said that he had no time to examine the symbol, but now the hand smelled strange. Mech invited Lenya to smell Tetsuya's hand. Lenya began to sniff Tetsuya's hand. Lenya covered her nose and screamed, then fell to the floor. The boys wondered what kind of smell it was. Mech grabbed Tetsuya's hand and said that Lenya needed to take another breath. Lenya shouted for Tetsuya not to come near her. Thighs angered Tetsuya. Mech sighed heavily and looked at Tetsuya. Mech began to insist that Tetsuya needed to bandage his hand with clothing. Later they would find out exactly what injuries he had. First, they needed to get out of the valley. Tetsuya bandaged his hand with a t-shirt and approached Lenya. The boys reached the wall, the exit from the gorge. Several defeated monsters lay on the ground. One of them twitched a paw upward. The boys stood at the edge of the chip, then Tetsuya sat down and pointed downward. Mech began babbling that they were finally free. Tetsuya replied that it didn't matter, the bodies of the monsters lay below. Mech showed the map and began to explain that the guys were now near the city of Maestros. This is neutral territory. The guys decided that Tetsuya would absorb these monsters and become stronger. Mech said that the guys should watch their step. So many goblins. The goblins were giggling and Mech kept going. Maybe necromancers are involved here, so it's better for them not to get involved in such matters. Lenya began to say that Mech is not so perfect, but she doesn't care what Mech does even before they met. Tetsuya nervously scratched the back of his head. Mech pressed her lips and turned away from the guys. The guys decided to move to the city. Mech looked around the area and realized there seemed to have been a battle here. The strange thing was that all the remains belonged to humans. Mech looked down and saw that the lizard people seemed to have been crushed by something. Mech thought she had no idea that people had such strength capable of easily overcoming opponents. Meanwhile, the most powerful explosions were raging near the walls of the stone castle. The townspeople standing on its walls were in armor. They were watching the explosions. One of the creatures said that she couldn't hold back, she simply wouldn't stand before the enemy. Nearby stood a man with a lion's head who declared that they were beastmen, known for their physical strength. The beastmen watched the battle and panicked. The man with the lion's head continued staring ahead and said that they really could lose the battle so easily to someone else. Nearby in the field walked a man with a huge shield, followed by soldiers and armor. The beastman stood before the castle walls and looked at the approaching army with fear. The guy with the shield and his subordinate began discussing the offensive plan. The man with the shield raised the shield and with a smile said that on the count of 3 he would destroy the wall. Within seconds, a huge shield appeared in the wall itself and it collapsed. From the wall, the beastmen began to flee and scream out of fear. The young man held the shield in front of him. Smoke was coming from it. The warriors in the affected armor began to rejoice. The wall fell from a single blow. The man hid the shield behind his back and, smiling, said that everything went successfully. The subordinates could continue the attack. The soldiers in armor began to arm themselves. After some time, the boys found themselves in the city. They stood on the street and looked around it with interest. Mech sat on Lenya's head. The boys were walking around the city and came across various monsters. At the same time, they discussed that they had not met humans or beastmen after all. Those were on the verge of extinction. Mech began to tell about Lenya. Supposedly, she had lost her memory and because of that was worried. Lenya took Mech off her shoulders and said that she was fine. Mech frowned and said that Lenya's accent was inescapable and because of that she was nervous. Lenya shook Mech and shouted that she had no accent at all. Tetsuya stood aside and watched what was happening. Mech lay on the ground and could not come to her senses. Then Mech shouted that money was needed. Tetsuya smiled and said that he would find a job. Mech replied that she already had her own plan. The boys found themselves in the arena. In front of Tetsuya stood several unusual monsters. Mech loudly threw out that they could earn from fights. The girls sat in the stands. Tetsuya was nervous and thought that so many people had never looked at him before the monster began to talk about Tetsuya's strength. One of the monsters activated Tetsuya's analysis ability and he laughed and began to insist that Tetsuya was level 1. Tetsuya trembled with nerves. The monsters began to smile and show their levels. Tetsuya looked at them and thought that the difference in levels was too great and that maybe the situation was too ordinary. The girls sat in the stands and began to worry about Tetsuya. The biggest monster swung and muttered that a person with level 1 could not cope with him and could not defeat him. The monster hit Tetsuya. From the blow, Tetsuya was thrown several meters away. Dust clouds rose into the air. Tetsuya was carried all the way to the edge of the arena. Wherever he stepped, dust rose and fragments of stone flew into the air. The monster clenched his fist and with a smile said that it was easy. Tetsuya stood up. This greatly surprised the monster. Tetsuya and Mac started a conversation. Tetsuya admitted that he was nervous. Mac suggested using the electricity ability. The monster clenched its fists and lunged at Tetsuya. Mech began to say that if Tetsuya hits the opponent's head with lightning, he will fall immediately. The monster hit the arena wall. The stands began to crumble and the spectators rushed away, causing a panic. Tetsuya retreated, then charged at the monster. Tetsuya lunged upward and a magical sign appeared between him and the monster. Then he struck the monster on the head and an electric discharge flew out. The monster fell to the ground and Tetsuya landed on his feet next to him. The fish-like monster held a spear and decided to attack Tetsuya. The monster rushed at Tetsuya. Tetsuya sharply turned away in fear and immediately began dodging the other monster's attacks. The monster could not understand how Tetsuya managed it. The monster spoke about Tetsuya's first level, then waited a bit. Tetsuya approached him and flashes of lightning began to burst from his palm. Tetsuya touched his head. A current discharge flashed, illuminating everything around. Foam came from the monster's mouth and the monster fell to the ground. The last monster raised its hands above its head and began to chant. Tetsuya shouted that he wanted to harm him and his friends. The monster replied, "These are not his friends." The strike was directed at Tetsuya. A huge explosion thundered in the arena. The monster clenched its hands in front of itself and rejoiced in victory. Tetsuya's legs were behind. Another explosion sounded, and the monster was thrown into fear. Tetsuya held the broken monsters in his hands. The rest of the monsters furiously protested what was happening. Tetsuya threw the bodies toward the monster and then an explosion occurred. The creature in the suit declared that he would not give the reward to the boys because they deceived him. The first level cannot win the fight. Mech glared fiercely at the man. Then Mech approached the man and began shouting that Tetsuya fought honestly. He climbed onto the counter and the man demanded proof. Many people quickly gathered nearby. The boys were driven out of the arena. They walked down the street thinking about what to do next. The girls suggested going to the guild. Tetsuya was surprised by the very existence of a guild in this world. Mech said it seriously. They won't let them in there without money and they simply don't have any. The men found themselves in a gloomy building. The boys found themselves near the doors of a gigantic building. Mech said the only way to get into the guild was to head to the battlefield. Tetsuya stated that he needed to better study his abilities. The sword began sliding up the stairs. Tetsuya was the first to reach the door and said that if he could defeat the golem, he would not give up so easily. Mech wanted to say something, but the guild doors suddenly opened and someone began to come out. Someone stumbled and crashed into Tetsuya. The fearsome monster settled on the ground. He glanced at Tetsuya and saw a gloomy shadow. His torso twitched. The monster grabbed his hands and began apologizing for the inconvenience, then suddenly realized a man was standing before him. The monster grabbed Tetsuya by the shirt and started yelling at him. Lenya rushed to the bushes. Meh was lying there. Tetsuya stood in front of the two stubborn monsters. Tetsuya looked back and saw Lenya pulling Meh out of the bushes. A fair-haired girl appeared before Tetsuya. She asked if Tetsuya wanted to join the guild. Lenya pulled out a bag from the bushes. Tetsuya looked at the man in surprise. The boys eventually ended up in the guild building. The blonde girl led them through the corridors. The monster looked at the boys and began discussing them. The boys found themselves in a spacious room. A map lay under their feet. The girl said she would tell them about the guild. The boys listened to her attentively. The girl raised her hand and said that the boys would be sent to different places to help the allies. Tetsuo looked at the girls in shock. Mech pondered the girl's words. First, the boys would be on neutral territory. After the test, they would be given another task, and now they would undergo a small trial. The girl showed a device displaying the employee's status. Tetsuya and Mech started talking about whether they should really take this test. After that, the boys brought their hands closer to the device. The girl began to intently examine the boys' statuses. Mech sat in place, and next to her appeared a card with characteristics. Then the girl looked at Tetsuya's characteristics and was surprised by what she saw. The girl was impressed by the absorption ability and was surprised again. Then she looked at the boys and said they passed the trial and were suitable for the guild. Mech also wanted to take the test. Mech started shouting indignantly that she was not a toy, and then Mech and Tetsuya began whispering that the girl simply did not notice. A curse spell was cast on her. The girl touched Mech's head and said she felt nothing, so the boys could make an advance payment for membership. Tetsuya gave Mech a malicious look and said money was needed here too. Mech tore off Lenya's head. Mech fell to the floor and began screaming that she was very ashamed, but they were poor, they had no money at all. Tetsuya stepped aside and thought in fear how Mech could scream so much. Other guild members began to grumble about Tetsuya's first level. The girl thought she might have problems, and Mech grabbed her by the leg and continued to beg. After some time, the girl gave the boys temporary guild cards and said they needed to look at the map. Missy would appear there. The boys had to choose one, and Mech hung on the girl's leg. A bunch of flags flared up around the boys. Mech reached out to the map and someone immediately started shouting from there. The girl was shocked. Then Mech headed to the exit and called the boys after her. Unusual guests entered the guild building. Lenya and Tetsuya ran after Mech. Meanwhile, the creatures who arrived approached the girl and began discussing Tetsuya because he was human. Strange creatures sat at the table and waited for news. A half-beast creature introduced a man who had previously destroyed the fortress wall. Meanwhile, on the territory of the humans, people gathered in one of the castle rooms. Monsters stood behind the chair and chains stretched. The girl sat on the chair, breathing heavily from pleasure. She had visible sharp fangs. She was sitting on a fair-haired boy who smiled sinisterly. Hiro Mew stood nearby. He nervously scratched the back of his head and said that he got a little carried away and destroyed the territory. The cropped blonde replied that they lacked people. The blonde raised his hand to his face and said that there was no point in destroying slaves and soldiers, he only wanted to reclaim his territory. Jiro raised a finger and declared that he had the ability to revive bodies. The blonde recalled the conquest of territories and said that they all needed to be friends. The men continued discussing battles and their allies. One of them was Sekai Ryoji. He held level 99. Nearby stood another dissatisfied ally, Takyong-yun. Taken began waving his hands in outrage and shouting about how he weaves his methods. He removed the girl next to him and tried to calm Taken. Taken angrily grabbed and chopped off the girl's head. She fell to the floor. Hiramu nervously smiled. Taken continued to scream wildly. Taki hid his sword. Yamada smiled maliciously and declared that they acted under orders and it was impossible to deny that. Taki maliciously squinted. After some time, Take found himself on the street. He continued shouting in open dissatisfaction. Armored soldiers stood next to him. Taki grabbed one of the soldiers and shouted that he wanted to conquer the lands of the elves. The soldier began to calm Taki. Take began to smile sinisterly, raised his hand, and said that they were heading to the territory of the elves. Meanwhile, Meh felt that something was wrong. Above the high mountain spread a bright sky and fluffy clouds floated across it. From the forest thicket rose a column of dust. Someone or something was rushing through the territory too fast. Loud footsteps rolled through the forest, echoing across the entire area. A huge black bull was rushing through the forest. On its head sat a small man who, clamped between the horns, was shouting loudly. A black cat was running alongside, and on it was Mech, who insisted that everything was already fine with Tetsuya. The black cat raced after the enraged bull. Mech started shouting that Tetsuya was a liar because this did not resemble the easy victory he had claimed. Tetsuya replied that it was all due to the extraordinarily huge size of the bull. Mech and Kit were soaked to the skin. They kept chasing the enraged bull. Tetsuya held tightly onto the bull's head. Mech shouted that she would no longer believe Tetsuya. Maybe he had some ability that could help them free it. Tetsuya raised his hand. A magic ball flared above him. Tetsuya said the food needed to be inspected. After that, Tetsuya struck the bull's head with a fireball. Then he activates the rat explosion attack. Tetsuya strikes with one hand while holding a sword in the other. Tetsuya shouted, "What the hell? Why don't the attacks work on this brute?" Mech replied fearfully that maybe it all depends on the brute's defense strength. Dust and pebbles rose into the air from under the bull's hooves. Mech firmly held the cat by the neck and said that the bull could be stopped by a meteorite, but the bull still charged forward at speed, and Tetsuya agreed with Mech's proposal. Tetsuya looks sharply ahead and nervously says that he needs to stop this bull. Tetsuya glances over his shoulder. Hands forward, a powerful attack is launched. Fragments of earth appear in the air. A giant sphere appeared in the sky. It began to fall and crashed right onto the enraged bull. Like a meteor, it struck the ground. Dust and soil fragments rose, and the bull flew at the huge boulder stone, not slowing down. Tetsuya noticed the bull was not going to stop. After the bloody explosion, the cat and Mech screamed but without sound. The enraged bull thrust its horns into the stone. Anger bulged the veins on his head. He gritted his teeth. Mech nervously asked how the bull managed to stop. The bull gritted its teeth and began to pull with its horns, trying to extract them from the stone. The cat and the fur watched the process in fear. Suddenly, the bull's head slowly moved away from the stone. Tetsuya appeared between the bull and the stone, and his eyes instilled fear. Tetsuya pushed the bull's head away from himself with his hands and feet. The horns almost tore out of the stone. A magical sphere began to appear above the bull. Tetsuya said to repeat the attack for now. Then the bull roared at full volume, and it was completely engulfed in flames. After some time, the bull fell to the ground, its tongue hanging out of its mouth. Half of the bull's body was crushed by a stone. The cat and Mech stood aside and made a surprised sound. Tetsuya jumped from a large boulder to the ground, clutching a sword in his hands. He headed to Mech's table. Tetsuya and Mech discussed how he was feeling, and then Mech began to tremble nervously. The cat wanted to ask her something. The black cat put its paws on its waist and began to nervously say that the master could not endure this. Because of him, they almost all died. Mech dropped to the ground and began to sweat. Mech was squatting and looking at the ground while the black cat continued to insist that now, since they had accepted the task, they would first discuss everything and discuss the details. Tetsuya began to stroke the cat's head and smiled. There was no point in shouting because the task was already completed. He glanced at his bandaged but not tied up bandage and said that now he could absorb it. The cat replied that they could take the bull to the city. Mech looked away and said that the bull's carcass was extremely valuable. If they brought it to the guild, they would be well paid, could even shorten the trial period and immediately pay the entrance fee. Tetsuya and the animal stood before the bull. Tetsuya looked at Mech and raised a finger in front of him. He began to talk about how to transport such a large bull. Mech replied that Tetsuya could carry it. Tetsuya thoughtfully looked at Mech, then at the bull, and froze in surprise. Meanwhile, in the guild, a girl came across unusual creatures. They started talking about Tetsuya, Mech, and Lenya. The unusual creatures were quite surprised to hear what task the boys had taken on. They began to discuss Tetsuya's abilities. Two more creatures in costumes appeared behind the girl. They asked the boys to look into the distance, and as soon as they obeyed, the boys were overwhelmed with wild astonishment. Tetsuya appeared on the city territory. He was carrying a huge black bull. Mech and Lenya were sitting on this bull. The unusual creatures began to discuss Tetsuya. Tetsuya and the girls eventually found themselves in Bat Guilds sitting at a table. Nearby, people loudly gossiped about Tetsuya's success. One of the guild members said that Tetsuya had completed the task but still remained sad. Unusual creatures approached the boys with mugs of beer and began congratulating Tetsuya on his victory. They also wanted to sit at Tetsuya's table. The boys found themselves at the table. They began pouring drinks into mugs and saying that Tetsuya needed to celebrate his victory. Nervously, Tetsuya said that he was worried about the commotion he had caused in the guild. The girl was arguing about something with the guild members. Several workers found themselves in front of the Black Bull. A few creatures appeared next to Tetsuya. The bastards rushed to Tetsuya and began thanking him for the material he gave. Tetsuya was afraid to accept praise from others. Tetsuya glanced at the joyful creaturess and remembered himself from another world. He began to smile and think about those who were nearby. Tetsuya glanced at the mech. She raised her paws and began shouting that despite all the troubles, this mission is considered successful. Lenya lay down next to the chair and admired the energy of the sword. The sword was saying something and suddenly tried to run away, but someone caught it. The blonde held the mech in her arms and declared that she would control Tetsui's missions. The mech began to protest. The girl handed Mech a few papers. Mech began to study them and realized that it was a check of the expenses incurred by the guild. The symbols fell on Mech. She held the check in her hands and began to nervously shout that because of this mission they went into the red. People around tried to calm Mech down. The action takes place in the Samaki cave. Inside it is turned inside out by a huge boulder. Along the walls, small plants are visible, rare, but they are able to grow even on a bare vertical wall. The hero stands raising his sword against a huge creature that looks very much like a mole. The hero has no idea to himself why him. The monster frantically prepares to attack the hero. At some point, the big rat still decides to attack and heads towards the hero. The latter immediately raises his sword above his head and thinks over what kind of mission it is and why he was chosen for it. While the hero fights monsters, a girl with long black hair runs beside him holding a basket that looks more like a box, and another brown bear rushes through the cave shouting that they need to find as many mushrooms as possible. Then the hero turns to his companions and says that it was very difficult. The young man relievedly sheathes his rather sharp sword. A tired but satisfied smile appears on his face. The bear continues gathering mushrooms and tells the hero to remember his last adventures, then adds that they always have work plenty of it. At the moment these words are spoken, clear displeasure is distinctly visible on the bear's face. The hero turns towards him and says, "If you remember their recent victories, including the destruction of Goblin Nest, the victory over Big Slime, and the destruction of kobolds," then the hero continues listing all their tasks. The brown one grumbled back only discontentedly, saying that although they are capable of handling a more difficult mission, for some reason they are not given even the most attractive tasks. The hero, in turn, just looks at the bear with incomprehension and a bit of surprise. Then the animal says that despite how hard and so hard they worked, they were still issued equipment not of the first grade. At the moment these words are spoken, the bear falls from the hill, trying to pick a mushroom from it. The hero begins to examine the sword given to him for the task very carefully. The boy thinks, maybe the bear is right. Thick black hair covers the upper part of his face. Then the hero is mentally transported to the city. In a huge, luxuriously decorated building, someone is screaming wildly in outrage-ceasing outrage. Its owner is clearly dissatisfied with something. On the floor in the room stands a wooden chest with shoes and clothes. Someone says these are the guild's belongings. And a female voice adds, she applied because someone was constantly dressed sloppily. The girl with blonde hair says that it is not that expensive. The hero replies to her that he did not need to do it and then thanks her for her kindness. As soon as the hero saw everything, he looked completely surprised. Suddenly the bear climbed into the box with clothes and shoes and asked if there was any weapon there. The girl replied that unfortunately there was none, and it was at these words that her voice sounded sad and confused. Hearing this, the bear immediately flared up and asked threateningly if they would come unarmed. The girl, leaning towards the bear to be on the same level with him during the conversation, says that the recent incident caused a delay in deliveries. Suddenly someone else enters the room. In a moment, a rather decent sword is in the hero's hands. He glanced at the weapon that flew to him and froze in surprise, then began to carefully examine it with his eyes. It turned out to be a rooster. And right from the doorstep he said it was a gift, but if it was too small for such a majestic figure as a rooster, then it was not needed. The hero, recovering from surprise, asked the unexpected guest if everything was really all right. The rooster answered the hero in a way that would not worry him and asked to be used for his intended purpose. As a result, the hero thanked his friend for such an unexpected joy, a battle sword. Suddenly the hero turned around, hearing the bear's cries. He grabbed the girl, shouted that he finally understood, this is all good. The bear also shouts and thanks the girl for allowing them to use it. The hero, together with his interlocutors, looked completely bewildered at how the scene was unfolding before them. None of them understood at all what was happening here. Next, the action shifts back to the present. The hero and his companions continue picking mushrooms. Noticing that they are avoiding work, the hero says if they helped him with mushroom picking, he would not object. Then the hero asks his comrades to finish this task faster. He wants to pay off the debt as soon as possible. At the moment of these words, the bear lies in the stone dungeons, and the girl crawls on all fours like a real cat. Then the action continues for some time. The bear approaches the box, which is already full of mushrooms. He looks a little to the side beyond the edge of the box and says that they will finally finish this quest. The hero looks seriously at his comrades and says that now they just have to carry these mushrooms. In response, the bear hangs on the crate and thanks everyone for the hard work, then adds, he and the girl will carry the mushrooms and Tetsuya will protect them from monsters. Then the bear adds that the mission turned out to be quite easy because it was a small cave with no monsters in it. The heroes move forward again through the cave. The bear, sitting in a box with mushrooms, does not stop his hurdy-gurdy and insists that there will be no monsters on the way back. Then the bear tells the hero that he wants to take on a more difficult mission, and they continue their advance through the cave. The sound of the hero's footsteps is heard, the echo of heels on stone. Suddenly he notices something. So when the heroes come out into an open space in the cave, the hero asks his companions to wait. The hero raises his head and sees a huge stone altar right in front of him, on which sits a bound man with his eyes covered. The hero loudly asks what is happening here. Then he asks again if there is anyone else here. Then the hero looks at the altar in horror and again has no idea what is going on. The bear suggests this is an altar for summoning demons, but as soon as the hero notices that the platform begins to glow, he decides to help the man. The bear asks him not to come closer. Suddenly, the man's face and body split in half and a huge hand bursts out of him. The hero stares blankly at what is happening. As a result, a gigantic black monster burst out of the man's body. The heroes decide that this is an enemy and they need to prepare for battle. The heroes learn this is a great demon with its own special name, Beelzebub. Beelzebub is a demon who lives in the demon world and his level is extremely high. The hero says he did not think that demons so greatly surpass humans in level. The bear thinks he does not understand where such a strong and dangerous demon came from here. At this time, the demon slowly approaches the heroes to attack. The bear explains, all those summoned from the demon world have a weakness, they need time to recover their strength. The monster begins to shout at the heroes that no one has survived after meeting him. Then the demon bursts into attack, saying that they can start the fight. He delivers powerful blows to the hero, but the hero blocks every strike of the monster. When the demon decides to attack the hero again, his companion joins the fight and transforms into a cat. The girl pushes the monster away with a powerful paw and growls loudly. But suddenly the cat notices that something is wrong. The demon grabbed her by the same paw with which she tried to push him away from the hero. As a result, the monster pulled the cat back by the paw with incredible strength. She did not like it at all, but the monster was not going to let her go so easily. The hero did not stop, continued to attack fiercely, striking him blow after blow, trying to hit right in the heart. The cat did not manage and found himself in flight, flew back with great force. Then the demon's paw reached out to the hero. The monster's hand was simply gigantic, and it was hard to believe that the hero could defeat this creature. While the cat continued flying backward, the hero prepared to strike the monster once more. The young man raised his sword above his head and at that moment shouted loudly. So the hero still delivers a powerful blow to the demon that broke free from the underworld. At the moment of this strike, the hero's face is tense and he himself is stubbornly determined to defeat the monster. But in response, the demon only grimly smiles with disgust, and the hero realizes his strike had no effect on the monster. Then the hero shouts to Lenny to retreat. He doesn't shout this to the cat for nothing, has a new plan, and the consequence should at least damage the monster's armor. Then the hero casts the acid pool spell on the demon, exactly at the moment when Lenya had already managed to move away from the hero's fight with the demon to a decent distance. This already began to further ignite the demon's anger, and he grinned even wider. The hero looks at the monster before him disappointedly. Then he examines the demon's armor and concludes that even the spell Acid Ball is completely powerless against it. Suddenly, the monster begins to reach its huge paw toward the hero about to touch him. He just freezes silently, shocked by the thought that now the monster will kill him. But at the right moment, a cat appears and pulls the hero out from under the blow. When the cat managed to pull the hero out from under the strike of the demon's mighty paw, the hero regained consciousness and was able to launch a fireball at the demon. The demon begins to reflect the fireball sent by the hero. The monster swings its mighty claws and dispels every spell. But the hero does not give up. He continues to attack the monster from the underground world, but suddenly he is overwhelmed by some inexplicable feeling of fear and horror. The demon breaks through the barrage of his spells and begins to approach the hero and the cat, who were trying to save him from the demon's attacks. In the end, the demon reaches the hero and strikes the young man in the torso. Then the hero and the cat still manage to retreat from the demon to a decent distance. The bear shouts instructions to them: stay away from the monster. The demon shudders with excitement and prepares to rush at the heroes again. The young man turns to the bear and asks if he has any ideas. The bear in response also asks the hero if he can use a spell called Meteorite. The hero says it would be better if the cave ceiling were higher. Suddenly, the hero notices that something is wrong with his hand. Dark smoke begins to burst out of it. This black smoke emits a very disgusting smell. It confuses not only the hero and his companions, but even the demon himself. The bear says that this black smoke is a curse. Lenya faints from the stench that eats away at the nostrils, and the demon, in turn, determines by the smell of the smoke who summoned him. The hero looks at the demon, and the demon says that he was summoned by Kasemi. As a result, the monster goes mad and growls throughout the cave that it will guard the freak from the abyss from this world and will not leave a single crumb of his soul. He also shouts that he will destroy the creature Kasama with all his might and lets go. The heroes encounter the demon in an even more terrible form. The bear says that because the monster used deployment, he was able to remove the power restrictions for some time. The bear says that the monster is going to use something truly serious. Then the monster roars and disperses a huge, powerful energy ball. The hero watches and realizes he cannot stop the demon, so he asks the bear not to let go of the cat and pushes them back. At that moment, the demon uses a dark, explosive spell. Its energy roar was extraordinarily powerful. The hero stands directly in the path of the spell's flight. The young man tries to cover himself with his hand, defending against it. The spell of incredible power destroys everything in its path, leaving no one alive. A gigantic energy whirlwind unfolds in the cave. The bear and the cat sit on the hill and carefully examine the trench formed by the demonic spell. The bear does not understand what it was. Then the bear shifts his gaze to the huge hole in the wall and begins to loudly and desperately call the hero. The bear continues to examine the huge hole in the stone cave wall. He still cannot comprehend what happened. He does not understand how this could have happened. The bear tightly squeezes the cat with his small paws and still cannot understand what happened to Tetsuya. Stone dust flies. Suddenly from the stone dust emerges a huge and powerful figure of a demon. He growls loudly, evil and fierce. On his back are huge black wings. Thick and hot steam bursts from the monster's jaws. Suddenly the monster notices the bear and the cat nearby. Immediately, having spotted the heroes, it calls them. At that moment, goosebumps run down the bear's back. The bear thinks that the monster is already very close. At that moment, his body is covered with cold sweat. He is afraid of what this demon might do to them. But to the bear's great relief, a huge monster passed by them with the cat, yet the cold sweat kept running down the bear's back. The hero froze in incredible amazement and complete confusion. Why did the monster not touch them? Then the bear decided to follow where the demon had gone. The cat was still in the same semi-conscious loss of strength and looked more like a corpse than a living being. While the demon was making his way further through the cave, the bear walked backward after him and tried to understand where that monster had gone. He walked and walked along the tunnel that the demon had made with his own spell. The bear still held on to him and thought to himself how deep he had dug this hole in the rocky thickness of the cave. The monster did not stop. He kept walking, and the bear followed. Suddenly, the demon froze and began to carefully examine something. Then the bear stopped following him. An unusual sight appeared before the bear's eyes. He never thought he would ever see such a thing. The monster loudly cursed as soon as it saw, in front of it, a man in armor and at the same time pressed against the wall. The gigantic winged creature carefully examined this scene. The bear also carefully examined this man who was hanging, or rather was glued dead to the wall. He thought he could never have imagined meeting a knight here. Then the bear asked how the knight ended up here at all and suggested that it might be Tetsuya. The hero is flying in some completely incomprehensible space. He has no idea what kind of place it is and assumes he is drowning. The young man is surrounded on all sides by a substance somewhat resembling water. Tetsuya does not understand what could have happened to him. He feels as if he has already left this mortal world, but at the same moment the question arises, where is he going? Suddenly, a bony hand begins to reach out to the hero. The hero does not understand who she is and even more so why she is here. The owner of the hand turns out to be a skeleton in a long sweater and an equally long skirt. The hero wonders, has he simply died or has he really ended up in hell? The skeleton immediately gives Tetsuya an answer to his question. He says that this is not hell at all, it is an abyss. And the skeleton also adds that this world is cut off from reality. Having spoken these words, he, together with the hero, plunges into the abyss. The young man is surprised that the skeleton can say something about the famous heretic, and Tetsuya is also quite puzzled by this. Then the skeleton informs the young man that the king is already waiting for him. Suddenly, near the hero and the skeleton, someone's huge eye begins to open wide. The closer the hero and the skeleton approach him, the wider someone's eye opens. This place both frightens and enchants. After a certain moment, Tetsuya still notices a huge eye staring directly at him. The hero does not understand what is happening or where this eye came from. Then the hero notices a spiral on his hand. It begins to move. This shocks him greatly. The skeleton says that the abyss freak will disappear from this world, along with the abyss and the pattern of this curse. The hero then distrustfully stares at his hand, then asks the skeleton what this pattern from the eye means and what exact nasty curse it represents, and also who this abyss is. During these questions, the hero with the skeleton continues to dive deeper and deeper, while the large eye still does not take its gaze off them. Then the position of the eye begins to change, and this reveals the emotions of its owner. The skeleton also begins to shift in time with the movements of the eye. This scene looks strange and somewhat comical. Eventually, the hero turns to the skeleton and asks what it is doing. Hearing this question, the skeleton looks at the young man completely confused. At the same time, it floats forward, raising its hands up. Then the skeleton continues to look at the hero with surprise and asks if he does not hear the voice of the king. The young man does not understand which voice is meant, so he clarifies. He probably means the huge eye. The skeleton nervously turns to the huge eye and asks it with its gaze what is happening now. Then the eye begins to say something to the skeleton. The skeleton replies that this is not according to schedule and starts a conversation about the whole situation. Then the skeleton turns to the hero and says that it apologizes for something. The hero looks at the skeleton, not understanding. If the young man earlier really did not grasp what was happening here, now he is completely bewildered. Then the skeleton says that this was completely unexpected for it. The hero still looks at the skeleton, not understanding a bit. He has no idea what is going on here. The hero continues to dive somewhere with that skeleton. He asks the creature what exactly was so unexpected for it. Suddenly, the gaze of the huge eye becomes anxious, even, to some extent, frightened. Here, right under the hero's feet, a huge demon begins to rise, and this, essentially, brought him to this incomprehensible, sometimes even creepy corner. The hero does not understand what this demon is doing here. The hero continues to tear his gaze and looks at the monster under his feet in amazement. He still does not understand what it is doing here. The eye behind the young man's back looks at the unwanted guest with malice, hatred, and special focus, and on the skeleton's face open confusion. The monster does not retreat, it continues to advance on the hero in the abyss. The hero says that things are bad, and right now the demon is slapping the Iron Knight with all its might. The knight is already pressed against the wall. And the demon, striking with force truly powerfully and quite firmly, drives the armor further into the wall. Behind him stands a bear, stunned and amazed. He does not understand what this monster is doing. Then the bear lunged at the enemy and roared that he must not do this because inside this armor was Tetsuya. The demon did not expect that some bear would try to stop him. Feeling that someone was clinging to him, the monster immediately turned his head and looked to see who dared to stand in his way. Then with one simple movement of his mighty and very mighty paw, the monster will throw comrade Tetsuya away. The bear flew to the opposite side from the demon, screaming in pain and frenzy. As a result, the animal ended up on the cold stone floor of the tunnel. It could not help its friend, who is now inside the armor embedded in the stone wall. Having thought of nothing better, the bear, being behind the monster, began shouting to his comrade Lechek, "If he is alive, let him immediately open his eyes." The hero was still in the world of the abyss. He did not understand at all what was happening right now. The skeleton explained to the hero everything he sees now is happening to him and his body in the real world. Then the skeleton adds that this crude thing, that is, the demon, holds the hero in the real world. Tetsuya also asks the skeleton if the demon is trying to send him to the next world. The skeleton does not react, it just freezes before the eye and tries to come up with a plan to convey to the hero the knowledge he really needs. Finally, he says, "We must act very quickly." The skeleton tells the hero, sorry, this time they don't have time to tell everything the hero needs, but the king will explain everything and say that he is theirs. And he adds, he wants the hero to know both he and the king want him to live. Other bony hands begin to reach for the skeleton and the hero, and the skeleton, addressing the hero, asks him to fight the demon trying to break into the abyss world and destroy the hero himself. As a result, the king gives the hero all the necessary information, and he turns to the skeleton and asks if it is true that Tetsuya will become stronger and come to life if he absorbs the corpses. The hero is amazed. How does the skeleton know everything? The creature apologizes and says the hero must hurry. The hero grimaces and looks down with disgust, then says that everything is happening too fast and too early, and asks the skeleton and the king to wait. Then the hero, glancing at the skeletons who continue to reach out to him, notices something strange. He pays attention to the fact that these are human skeletons and they are wearing clothes from his world. The skeleton rushes at the hero again, shouting that they have no time at all. The hero also asks why these creatures are helping him. Tetsuya remembers his comrades who remained in the real world and thinks that he must return for their sake, because if he does not return, his close friends may suffer. The hero begins to absorb the bodies of the dead, thus increasing his power level. At the same time, immersed in something like a trance, he considers whether to use his ability on them, but at that moment he faces a moral choice. If he does this, he will become a mediator in the Temple of the Dead. Suddenly, the voice of the bear from the real world breaks the hero out of the trance. He loudly shouts at the demon, who does not stop hitting the armor in which the hero's body is located, so that he no longer harms his apprentice. When the demon completely ignored the bear's order, the bear switched to a pleading tone, begging the monster to release Tetsuya. And when the request yielded no useful result, the bear decided to try another approach and attempt to wake Tetsuya again. Then the bear abruptly turns back to the demon and starts hitting him on the leg, shouting for him not to ignore him. While in the abyss world, the hero hears the bear's cries. He does not understand why his friend is shouting these words. For him, it remains a mystery. Then the hero assumes the bear wants to save him. Tetsuya is very surprised by this. In the end, the hero decides to focus and escape from the abyss back to his real world. In the end, the hero firmly decides for himself. He must fight for his comrades. He begins to swim in the opposite direction from the skeleton, trying to break out into the real world. The skeleton watches him with satisfaction. Tetsuya begins to approach a huge crowd of corpses, intending to devour them. Rushing forward, the hero thinks that he will violate his master's instructions. He is also troubled by the thought of whether his master will be disappointed to learn about this, but ultimately the hero shifts to another thought. The situation is critical now. In the end, the hero comes to the conclusion, in this situation, the only way out is to absorb the corpses. At that moment in the real world, the bear rises to protect the armor in which Tetsuya's body is located. He tries with all his might to protect them from the demon. The monster continues to approach the bear, who is literally hanging on the armor embedded in the wall. The bear shouts to the monster that even with such a body he will protect Tetsuya, and then adds, the demon will not even dare to touch his disciple. The demon completely ignores the bear's words and again prepares to strike his most powerful blow at the armor along with the bear, who covers them with his small body. The fist is just beginning to approach the bear and the armor when suddenly the demon's face expresses obvious surprise and confusion. The armored hand managed to stop the monster's powerful blow, and the bear is still trembling. At the moment when the armored hand intercepted the monster's fist, Tetsuya Knight's eyes opened and shone with a bright white light. While Tetsuya continued to clench the monster's fist, the bear came to and looked at Tetsuya, who had resurrected, with surprise. Eventually, the demon breaks away from Tetsuya and from the bear, who has just awakened from sleep on his huge, powerful wings. Suddenly, dark smoke begins to burst from the hero's body. Because of this, the demon's face shows frank surprise, even fear. The bear, sitting in the hero's arms, loudly wonders what kind of black smoke is coming out of the hero's body. The demon feels that Tetsuya has become significantly stronger. He utters these words and raises his hand high above his head to strike a new blow at the hero. Then he strikes him again, calling him a freak from the abyss. But the monster's hand does not manage to reach the hero's face. The hero hits him right in the face with the colossal power first. The hero is fiercely angry. He dared to strike his comrades. But after this blow, the black smoke that enveloped Tetsuya disperses, and the bear, looking at the hero, is surprised and concerned. The bear is tormented by the question, why was the hero resurrected and why did he return with renewed strength while the hero himself is now in a semi-conscious state? The bear is extremely worried about his pupil. Then the hero gathered all his strength and struck the demon again with a rather powerful blow. It turned out that the blow was so strong that the monster was dragged a huge distance. Rather, the demon was pulled out completely from the tunnel he himself had created. As a result, the monster was slammed against the wall. Not believing his eyes, he began to look at the hero, who had noticeably raised his level and was able to throw the highest demon such a great distance. Then the hero slowly moved towards the demon, intending to completely take his life. Rage boiled in the hero's veins, both because the monster tried to send him to the next world and because he dared to harm his comrades. Then the demon shifts his gaze to the hero's hand, where an eye is drawn. At that very moment, he realizes the hero has acquired a cursed power. So the hero decides to use the most powerful spells. He places his tattooed hand on his face, and at that moment, a similar eye opens on his face. Then the hero's body slowly begins to blacken. He is engulfed by dark energy. The demon freezes at such a transformation of the hero. The eye that was once on the hero's hand and now is on his face begins to move, expressing emotions and coming to life. This enrages the demon so much. When the hero is almost finished with the transformation, the demon decides to attack him. Starting the attack, the demon calls the hero a freak from the abyss. When the monster's fist hit the hero's face, the black transformation dissipated. It began to retreat back into the tattoo on the hero's hand. At that moment, he stood as if rooted to the spot, not even moving. Then the hero disdainfully looked at the demon's fist. It was dangerously close to his face and continued to pull the dark energy back into the tattoo. Then from the tattoo on the hero's hand bursts a huge and powerful pillar of dark energy. It flies straight at the demon and lifts him high into the air. In this stream of dark energy, there were countless bony hands. They rained devastating blows on the demon's body, one after another. The monster could not comprehend where these hands and the powerful blows flying from them came from. Then the hero decided to change the trajectory of his punches. The demon never understood who the hero really was. When Tetsuya continued to strike the monster, it finally realized, this is the power of King of the Abyss. The hero did not stop and kept unleashing his devastating blows on it, but suddenly something inside him responded with a strange feeling. Then the demon, having received another blow to the face from the hero, decided that he did not feel even one of his strength within himself. In an instant, the demon jumped back a decent distance from the hero and threw something to the hero's side that raised huge clouds of dust, then loudly promised, "Now I will grind the hero to dust." At that very moment, the demon used the dark explosion technique. A huge energy sphere from under his hands rushed straight at the hero. From the outside, it seemed that after such a blow, nothing living would remain, not even the hero. The monster hovered over the place where it had just released a huge and powerful stream of energy. It hovered, waiting for confirmation that it had ultimately won. A pair of tika flew out of the demon's jaws. He wholeheartedly hoped he had defeated the hero, but how surprised he was when he saw the hero stood as if nothing had happened in clouds of dust. His astonishment knew no bounds, shouted that the abyssal freak was still alive. Suddenly, the chains intertwined so tightly that they squeezed the demon's entire body. The monster shuddered from shock, then remembered. Its limitation is slowly but surely returning again, beginning to take effect. Then he turns to the hero and realizes he is still standing firmly on his feet, and due to Tetsuya's restrictions, he definitely cannot defeat him. Because of this, the demon bursts into rage and attacks the hero as soon as he gets a chance to finish him off as quickly as possible. As a result, the demon again sends a stream of extraordinary energy to the hero, hoping to end the clash this way. The power of the strike was such that the place where it hit was covered with a hail of stone fragments and clouds of dust. Then the demon decided to climb even higher to make sure from there that nothing was left of the hero after such a blow. Then the demon says that because the hero's power has grown decently after resurrection, the monster will not be able to cope with him. Then the monster above looks at the hero and shouts that this freak from the abyss will sooner or later leave this mortal world anyway. The hero is not going to let the demon go so easily. He begins to gather a magical circle in his hand, which quickly comes together. Then the hero looks up at the demon and says that he will definitely leave this world before him. Then suddenly and imperceptibly, even to the monster itself, something huge and black like a black hole flashes above the demon. The demon notices this and falls into complete shock. He curses the freak from the abyss. This something turned into a huge boulder. It crashed down on the demon with a roar, completely crushing him and most likely depriving him of any chance to escape into this world. Then the hero moves a huge boulder from where the mighty Devon of the highest level just appeared. As a result, instead of the great demon, there is an almost lifeless monster lying motionless, more like a flatbread. The hero easily lifts the lifeless and heavy body with one hand. The hero looks at his enemy with complete disgust and contempt. At that moment, the expression on the demonic face in space showed a complete exit from reality. The eyes disappeared from the sockets and several teeth fell out. When the hero continues to fight the demon, his comrades come out of the cave. The bear carries a cat on his back and at the same time holds a sword in his small paws. The bear cannot understand what is happening here. Then the bear begins to look closely at the place where the hero is fighting the demon and realizes Tetsuya managed to cope with the monster. Then the bear even starts to wonder if Tetsuya is okay. Seeing that the mentor is watching him, the hero turns around and apologizes for disturbing him. Then he says everything is already fine, and only after that does he ask the mentor if the others are okay. The fighter sees that the hero is definitely fine and blossoms with joy. Tears just flow from his eyes. He shouts the name Tetsuya at the top of his voice throughout the cave. In the evening, the heroes return to the city. They talk about how they had a bad day. The mission failed, but in the end, they understand that it was not their fault. One of the heroes lies in the bath and says he had many suspicions. He seemed to have met the devil. The bear nods, supporting his words. Then the bear adds, in the end, only a burnt potato remained of the demon. The bear asks Tetsuya what kind of demon it was. He says that the guild apparently conducted an inspection, but currently knows nothing. Then the hero's mentor says that it is still good that in the end they are not to blame for anything. Just then the bear remembers something. He turns to Tetsuya and asks what happened to him when he fought the devil. The bear says he thought the hero had left this mortal world. Hearing these words, the hero fell ill at heart and wondered whether he should tell this to his mentor. Noticing this reaction, the bear begins to look at the hero with incomprehension. Tetsuya begins to say that he really does not understand how he managed to survive the curse placed on him, and then adds that he will no longer find out the answers. The bear grumbles irritably that this time he saved the hero's life, but at the same time an unknown force is dangerous, and the bear remembers that the demon also shouted something about this force. Then the bear recalls the monster called the hero, the abyss freak, and thinks to himself, he himself does not understand anything at all. Then the bear says he will not rely on the curse. After that, he has a thought. He asks the hero if he acquired the power that the devil used. The hero shows the bear a magic circle with information and receives an affirmative answer. The bear asks the hero to use the devil's power on him and check if he can return to normal. The hero asks the mentor in surprise if he can really use this power on others. The bear says that, in his opinion, it is possible. The hero lifts him over his head and asks if it is not dangerous. The bear replies that everything will be fine, and even if the hero fails, nothing terrible will happen. As a result, the hero still decides to try to use magic on his mentor to return him to normal. As soon as the hero cast the spell, something big fell into his bathtub with a crash and a wave of water rose. Something completely unexpected appeared before him, which made him grimace. As it turned out, it was a girl who ended up in his bathtub. She happily says that she thought so. The girl was dressed nicely. When she realized that she had managed to regain her body, joy overwhelmed her completely. She joyfully shouted that she had finally returned. and the hero still looks at her in surprise while she says, 60 years have passed since she was in such a form. Then the girl quickly runs to the mirror in the bathroom and begins to admire herself. She admires her beautiful hair and neat facial features. She says that she is simply beautiful, but the girl remembers that she is not alone in the bathroom. Then she turns to Tetsuya and asks what happened. After that, she asks again if his master looks so good that he got excited. The hero freezes further and looks at the girl in astonishment. Then he says that he thought his mentor was a plush toy bear. The girl replies that this is her real body, not the body of a teddy bear. The hero explains, he thought so because the girl apparently really does not like to move. She adds that it was just hard for her to do it. Suddenly the girl sharply approaches the hero and looks at him attentively. After that, she begins to say that now she is in a good mood and that she is glad the boy helped her. Tetsuya silently looks at the girl and decides to clarify what she is trying to do. The girl asks the hero if he remembers what she said in Death Valley. Then she says that she said then she would make him hers and clarifies if he really believed that it was complete trash. The hero also reminds, a soft toy suggested it to him. The girl continues her thought and says that she is serious now. She will sign the couple's vow together with the hero. And she adds, she does not care how long they will stay there. The hero does not understand what she is talking about at all. Suddenly the girl begins to bring her face closer and closer to Tetsuya's face. She says that she can just relax. The hero does not understand what she is doing. The girl says that her heart is beating faster and faster, and he asks her not to worry because she is about to give him her first kiss. But as soon as the girl touched the hero's lips with hers, she immediately turned into a toy for crying. In the end, the hero kissed the bear and then asked the girl to understand that she had returned to her previous form. As soon as the girl realized this, she was overwhelmed by complete shock. The hero says that it seems he will need a little more time to use the demon's power again because at his current skill level the ability lasts only 2 minutes. Because of this, the characters sit in the bathroom and awkwardness literally flies in the air. The ex-girlfriend thinks, even if she returned the body for a long time, it is still not enough for her. And when the hero tries to say something, the toy asks them to just be silent. Then the girl, shouting that she is a bear again, jumps out of the bathroom. The hero looks at her in confusion in the light. When the girl is already hiding from the bathroom, the hero is still standing in uncomfortable numbness. And then he says into the void that she should not have run away. Then he remembers their kiss in the bathroom and says that there is absolutely nothing shameful here. The action is postponed for some time. The heroes stand at the start of the quest in a neutral zone. They are informed that they need to arrest the lizard people, the corpse thief. Then the bull turns to the fish and says, now they attack those whom his friend cornered, and then adds that he will deal with them himself. Then the bull turns to the hero and tells him not to lose his head. The hero nods in agreement, and then the bull adds that their targets have already arrived. When the lizard man bursts out of the cave, the bull shouts to the heroes that this is their leader, and he must not be let out. Then the bull rushes towards the lizard man and shouts to him that the greatest reward for his capture will go to him. But unexpectedly for the bull, he outflanked the enemy and continued the advance further. The bull, realizing that he managed to slip away, was very surprised. Suddenly the hero flew over the head, rushing on a cat together with the bear. The bull, noticing them, shouted that the thieves would not be allowed to escape. The hero did not lose pace and continued to chase the leader of the thieves, carefully keeping the target in sight. The bear shouts to the bull that if he had trusted them from the very beginning, none of this would have happened. And then he tells Tetsuya that he has to arrest the lizard man. The hero decides to use drawing thread. He casts this spell and throws the threads coming out towards the leader of the lizard men thieves. At that moment he gets lost in them and looks, not understanding what actually happened. The net completely entangles the thief's body. The hero looks at this image a little confused and then apologizes to the bear for the fact that the lizard man almost managed to escape. Suddenly someone calls the hero and he turns around. He sees the bull also fell right into his nets. The hero was very surprised by what his friend was doing. The bull orders the hero to stop sucking out his health. Then the action moves to the city square. All the inhabitants have gathered there. The heroes are somewhere in a building. The rooster says that they caught the whole team and the bull insists that nothing would have happened without him. The rooster reminds him that he almost missed the main point. Then the bull immediately pretends as if he doesn't care at all. After that, the rooster says that their juniors did an excellent job. Tetsuya thanks his friend for the praise. Feeling jealous, the bull tells the hero not to show off. The hero apologizes to him, and the rooster tells the bull that he ruined everything and asks, "Climb behind the hero's back." The bull, feeling threatened in his authority within the team, tries to knock down the rooster, but the hero intervenes in the conversation and asks them not to quarrel. Then he adds, if it weren't for the bull, they wouldn't have managed. The same one looks at the hero with a confused face as if things are going wrong in response. Tetsuya continues, supposedly this may seem like the bull's mistake, but in fact he taught them exactly like that. Moreover, the bull gave the hero a moment of glory. And finally he concludes, even if the bull doesn't care about them, he still did a great job. The bull, touched by a bunch of compliments from the hero, encouragingly pats him on the back, but so hard that the ground almost collapses under the hero's feet. Then the bull says, since the hero worships him so much, he will go with them on the next mission. He orders the hero to watch and learn. The bear standing nearby thinks that the bull is too naive. Then the bull adds, when he gets a license, the hero will obey him too. Then a girl flies into the conversation and asks the bull not to touch the hero. The bull replies that everything is fine and that he won't do anything to him. Then the girl wonders if their next mission will be in the elven lands. The bull asks her not to be afraid, they still won't go until evening comes. The girl says that there are problems in the elven lands now, so she asks them not to neglect preparation. The bear listens attentively. Then the bear looks at the girl confused and asks what her problems in the elven territory mean. The girl replies that she doesn't know the details, but it seems that people are being bullied. The bear looks at the girl in shock. The rooster strokes his chin and thoughtfully says that people are on the brink of extinction and wonders what is actually happening there. The rooster is asked if these are not rumors. The girl says that supposedly the appearance of these so-called brave men played the main role here. When the hero hears about the brave men, he looks at the girl in fear. The man standing behind the rooster clarifies whether they are talking about soldiers or their leaders. Meanwhile, the bull interrupts the conversation and says he doesn't care who they are. As soon as he sees them, he will send them immediately. The rooster says that despite everything, the war between humans and elves is something unusual. He says his grandfather told him what happened after such a war. The bear thinks to himself that that war was 60 years ago. The heroes talk about the Great War on the way to the mission site. One of them says that about 60 years ago there was a war during which the human species invaded foreign lands to seize territories. Then he says that people having the largest army and territory in the whole world conquered a great number of lands in an instant. And then, when the heroes had already entered the territory of the elves, the rooster says that supposedly only the elves are capable of completely stopping the invasion. The bear asks in surprise if only the elven commanders can compete with them. They tell him that at that time the country was ruled by the empress just ascended to the throne. They understood her both intellect, magic, and military tactics. The empress was a genius. He insists that finally those who survived united and could already fight back against the people. The blonde, intrigued by this story about the empress, turns to the girl and asks what else she knows about this empress. The girl replies, all she knows is that she became incredibly famous because of her beauty. Someone says, according to rumors, the empress screamed loudly and had a very short temper. In response to the words about a short temper, the bear attacks the rooster because that very empress is a plush toy. The rooster asks the bear not to be so angry. The hero looks at the two, puzzled and impressed. Then a girl flies into the conversation, pulls the bear away from the rooster, and says that the current empress of the elves is also extremely serious. Then someone says that it seems people are creating a lot of problems right now, and then adds, if they are so strong now, then the front should also grow. Then a cat joins the conversation and says that she wants all of them to stop this war because of it she and her companions cannot travel safely. Everyone looks at the cat in surprise. To this, the bull replies to her that it is not so easy to end it, and then the rooster adds, it would be nice if it could be done like this. Then someone says that if the war in this world stops, all species will stop worrying about the future, or they themselves will not be able to cope with their future. He says that everyone will understand this as soon as some upstart appears. This upstart can be either a hero or his worst enemy. Then the action shifts to the hero. He is training with a sword on the edge of a mountain, making strikes and swings with the blade. With each sword swing, the hero counts how many he has already made. At some point, he has already managed to make 9,995 sword swings. A bear sits nearby watching the hero. The hero notices that the bear looks puzzled and asks why he is so sad. Then he assumes that the bear is worried about the elven territories. The bear flies in his thoughts. He thought about the brave, and then he comes to the thought, now almost no one can summon people from another world, but this is only a rumor. Then a girl in the form of a plush bear thinks that people are actually very strong, so they will overcome difficulties but still win. Then she turns to the hero and says that she is very worried about him and hopes that nothing will happen to him. The hero continues to train and thinks that they say the appearance of the so-called brave ones played a decisive role here. Then the hero remembers old acquaintances from his past and thinks that it is definitely somehow connected with them. Then the she-bear says that she also needs to prepare to be as confident as possible. After that, she asks the hero if he has already finished sword training. The hero answers affirmatively. Then the bear suggests trying to use dark explosion. The hero says that the city is very close here. And the bear replies that the explosion will become the hero's main skill, so it is worth training. The hero says that the girl in the bear form is right, but now it is night, it is not worth doing it right now. The girl says that everything will be fine and asks the hero to launch the explosion into the sky once. And when the hero begins to form the ball for the explosion, she adds that it should not be done with full power. Then the hero focused and began to fill the already formed ball with energy. He started casting the spell into the sky. When the ball was fully formed and he pronounced the word explosion, the hero was about to launch this spell into the sky but stopped. The bear asked what was wrong with him. The hero replied that he needed to charge himself. So the bear concludes the skill is still low, which means to shoot, time is needed. And using it in the same way as the demon also requires time. The hero continued to fill the ball with energy. Then he told the bear that everything seemed to be coming out. The bear replied that then they could destroy the moon. When the bear gave the hero the command to shoot, he immediately fired. The arrow shot by the hero flew a huge distance in the dark night sky, and the hero, frozen in surprise, followed it with his gaze. Then the hero says that his shot is not as strong as the one the demon made. The bear replies, to release all the power, you first need to charge it. Suddenly, the hero hears strange sounds from the city side. He turns there and realizes that an alarm has sounded for him. The hero says that she was announced because he used the explosion in the sky. The bear nods in agreement. The heroes hear screams, everyone must return to the city. Then information about an urgent message. This message says that all elves of Maestros must appear in the guild, and there is also news. The elven lands are in danger. Then in the city someone says that the elven lands are in danger and that a crisis regime has been declared. Many will wonder what might happen next with the Maestros. All elves receive orders to prepare. The hero approaches the huge crowd of elves. He hears, the elves will be informed when they are fully gathered and completely ready. The hero decides to cheer up the elves and tells them that everything is fine with the situation, they will be able to win. In response, the bear calls the hero a fool and insists that humans are too strong. If the elves relax, they will be defeated. Suddenly, someone asks the hero to go on a reconnaissance mission and check what is happening there. The hero looks at the interlocutor with a confused gaze, and when he sees that huge bands of elves are going on reconnaissance with him, he says that a small detachment of people is sent on reconnaissance. After that, the hero makes his way through the crowd of elves and suddenly notices something. The hero sees a girl wrapped only in a towel and hears her say, she asks all elves not participating in the mission to go and prepare where she points. After that, she adds that everyone must contact the servants as soon as possible and master the guild's plan. The hero looks at the girl in amazement and thinks that everything was so urgent that she didn't even have time to get dressed. Suddenly, the girl is asked to explain exactly what happened. It turned out to be a bear. He was told that Takahashi and his friends were already working on it and would return later once they figured it out. In response, the bear jumps at the girl and shouts that they can detain her, that they are ready for this clash, and then stubbornly demands that the girl name the current state of the elves' territory. Hearing these words, many people begin to wonder, does the elven land not lead on credit? It directly leads the bear. The deer standing nearby looks at the crowd in fear and wonders what they are doing at such a tense moment. The bear does not intend to fall behind the girl. He asks, give him your board, it must definitely have information about the state of the elves' lands. The girl objects, it is a magical thing and only the owner can handle it. In the end, the bear, pressing down with all its weight on the towel in which the girl was wrapped, tears it off her. The hero, noticing this, does not understand what the bear is doing. The girl shyly covers herself with her hands, then continues to calm the top, where she is eventually ordered to dress. The bear receives a strong slap on the back of the head. His head takes on a very strange shape. His cat also slapped him on the head. The girl continues to insist. If everyone has already gathered in the guild, then she will start explaining their plan. She asks for the card. After that, she explains that she will show the current state of elf lands. The girl continues and says that as a result of the investigation, 3 castles fell due to the invasion of the human race, and it is also believed that this caused the loss of more than half of the elves' territory. Then he says that the next target of the people will be Braxel Castle, but humanity is very far from this castle, so the invasion there is still in question. Here the elf cuts into the conversation and says that the capital is right behind him, and if this castle falls, something irreversible will happen. The bear tries to explain why the elves humiliate themselves like this. Supposedly, if they once defeated humanity, they will manage now and even more so. The girl, having listened to the bear's words, says that she does not think anyone can defeat her in such a small territory that she knows so well. And then the bear wonders what is ultimately happening to humanity. The girl replies that they believe the current human race has a power greater than the power of the beast. The bear asks again if the girl really means to say that the man-beast was sent to the next world by humans. The girl replied that obtaining information was difficult, and then that human territories and the lands of the Tusks have no connection. As a result of repeated investigations, it was almost certainly an invasion of the human race. After this, she says that all current missions must be cancelled immediately and everyone must be returned to their homeland. Then she turns to the elves and says that she understands everything, but now they must return to their city. Then she and Olin say that we must not forget, people have an unknown power and if they decide to stay, it will be very hard for them. Hearing these words, the hero tensed up. Then the girl asks everyone to be careful with the creatures called heroes. As soon as Tetsuya hears these words, he clenches his teeth in anger. Then the action shifts to Elb's castle. There, each elf is sent to the next world one by one. She approaches the huge doors of the throne hall. As soon as she enters, she sees a young man sitting on the throne and 2 knights guarding him. She wishes luck to their heroes. She approaches the huge doors of the throne hall. As soon as she enters, she sees a young man sitting on the throne and 2 knights guarding him. She wishes luck to their heroes. The young man sitting on the throne orders his subordinates to proclaim only victory and nothing else. The girl, entering the throne room, apologizes to the young man for having to defend the castle before her arrival, and then the girl summons a magic circle. As a result, she says that now it is time to make the slaves work, and also that now the beast people will defend the castle. The girl says that they already have them, although it took quite a lot of time to create. She adds, all thanks to Ashima, now they have many slaves, which means it will be much easier to recruit pawns. Then she turns to the young man and tells him that if needed he can take a pair for himself. He says it's all because of a girl named Hiroshi, but his soldiers are getting fewer and fewer, so they need to get out already. The girl wonders, will the guy just start pulling them out of there? He himself replies to her that he will destroy the elves and capture the next territory. The girl says that the young man is quite a serious person. The girl adds that others are simply enjoying life in this world, and thanks the young man for his enthusiasm. The young man asks the girl to be silent. He says he will just put an end to this land scam. Hiroshi says that conquering this territory is the goal of return that the hero set for himself. Because of this, the girl concludes, Master Take wants to return to his world as soon as possible. Then the girl says why wouldn't the hero cooperate with Tetsuya in this case, since his skills, unlike the young man's skills, are very useful when dealing with great powers. In response, the hero asks, did she dare to compare him with Tetsuya? At this moment, the hero became very angry. As a result, the young man goes outside and splits the castle into 2 parts. All his subordinates look at him with surprise and horror. The young man says that when he is compared to Tetsuya, he hates it. The young man says that from the very beginning the hero is the weakest of the 4 and he is not going to leave it unpunished. He starts a conversation about level limits, skills, status, and all that. He is already tired of it all. Then the young man draws attention to the elf's corpse. It lies nearby. The boy sees, it is in a pool of blood and the body is already lifeless. The young man goes mad seeing this elf and kicks it with all his might so much that blood flies everywhere. He hits the body and shouts that everything is driving him crazy and that he was thrown into this world. The young man says then he will return to his world, and also says that he will send everyone to the next world. The action again shifts to the city where the main heroes have stopped. Everyone is trying to figure out the situation and understand what to do next. As a result, one elf says that it's time to set off because they can no longer wait and that they need to save their homeland. She will still say that if they are lucky, they will be able to press humanity to the ground with the force of their troops as soon as they return home. Suddenly, someone addresses the elves. It turned out to be a bear. The elf girl returns to him and asks what happened because they need to hurry. Then she says that if he calls her, he must do it quickly. The bear does not know what to answer him. He thinks to himself what to do now. He tried not to be so helpless. The hero notices how the bear is worried. As a result, he decides to address the viewers himself. He asks if he can go with the girl to the land of elves. The cat says if the hero goes, then she will go too. Then the hero adds that he knows a skilled elf, so he is on their side. The bear, hearing these words, sheds tears of gratitude and joy. The girl who manages the guild says she does not want to get involved in this. The hero replies that he understands her perfectly but still asks, can't they do anything at all? The hero says that he is an ordinary first level and the only reason he has come this far is the elves. Therefore, he asks permission to do a favor for the elves in return. The hero thinks that an elf cannot be assigned to another place. The girl turns to the deputy head of the guild and asks about it. He begins to look away thoughtfully. Then he says that if the elven lands get into trouble, the guild leaders will give them special permission to go there. Accordingly, he says he will talk to the guild leader and then the hero will be left alone. The girl thanks him. The hero continues to stand in a fighting stance on the bow, and the girl says that now she has a special statement. She addresses the hero with the words, as a training mission, the hero and his comrade are assigned to check the current situation in the territory of the elves. The hero and the bear are beaming with joy, but the girl says there is one but. He continues, at least a member of the licensed guild must be nearby as a supervisor. She says that this is a mandatory condition if they want to serve temporarily in another territory. The hero and the bear look at the girl in surprise. One of the elves says that the hero will not ask him to go with them. The girl standing nearby replies, they are currently fighting with the tribe of humans, so you never know when they might betray. The elf says that generations have changed. Maybe the hero is not to blame, but they have not forgotten the war that humans started 60 years ago. Then the elf adds, there is one thing he will never forgive the hero for. The hero asks what exactly that thing is. The elf says that the name the hero gave him is terrible and he will never accept disrespect. The bear is stunned by this statement. He is shocked that the elf can understand him. The hero whispers in his ear, if he lets him return to his original form, will he not be able to convince them? The bear says that they will decide. This is witchcraft and a few minutes will not be enough to bring the crowd of elves to their senses. Then he says he cannot imagine what chaos will erupt if his true identity is revealed. Meanwhile, the she-bear wonders what will happen if the guild finds out she is not a messenger. Then the she-bear says that she is not registered in the guild, which means she will abuse her chances. She says that if this happens, it will be more than a training mission, and in the worst case, the hero will be expelled from the guild. Then the she-bear says that she is simply considered incompetent. Here the hero begins to worry about his future and about the future of the former empress of the elves. Then the bear approaches one of the elves and asks about the companion. He is asked to find out if she can introduce them to someone trustworthy. The young man replies that he would like to help somehow, but under these circumstances he is overwhelmed and cannot help them with anything. Then the bear turns to the hero and says that not many people have the ability to accompany someone into a combat zone in another territory. He mentions the rooster, but the hero replies that all the graduates who could help them have already moved on to the next task. The hero says he does not know what to do with them, but suddenly a bull approaches them and declares that they have forgotten something. He approaches them and asks what this means, and a question flashes in his eyes because the characters begin to look at him strangely. Suddenly the heroes loudly shout the word senpai, addressing the bull, who continues to stare at them intently, understanding nothing. After that, he asks what they need. The action shifts to Exiled Castle. The heroes who have reached the castle realize this territory is occupied. The bull does not understand why the castle is guarded only by zombies. The characters do not understand at all what is happening here. The bear says that people return corpses in the form of zombies, and because of this, their number increases. Then he says, if you look closely, among the zombies there are no elf corpses, therefore, they are most likely used as well. Then the bear says that this is a terrible act that must be punished. He says that is why he does not like people. Then the bear looks at the hero with doubt. Then, deciding that the hero is offended, he says that he is special. The hero thinks to himself, despite the apology, he is still offended. Then the bear is interested in how Linnea feels. He questions her because among the corpses there may be people she knew here. Then he tells the girl that black and white is similar to Linnea herself. The girl replies, her face is not so covered with sixes, so this is not her friend. The bear is surprised by this answer. To this, the girl replies that it is she who transforms thanks to skill, so she is upset. The bull tells the heroes to stop talking, it is time to start. The bear nods in support. The bull says that to complete the task, he needs to reach the capital, but because this forest is too deep, he might get lost. Because of this, he says that he can only use the route that passes through the castle, but with such a position, even that will be difficult to pull off. So the bull says that he just needs to clear the way. The heroes look at their friend in amazement. Then the bull shows him a thumbs up and says that the heroes are incredibly lucky. They have the same tasks. So the bear and the cat sit on the bull's back and set off outside to destroy the monsters, but the bear stops them. Then the bull asks confusedly what exactly the bear said, and then the bull declares that he is the leader of this team, so everyone should follow him. Then the bull thinks to himself that he always dreamed of leading. The bear nods in agreement, then asks the bull to listen to him. The bull agrees. The bear reflects on how hard it is for him to share with the bull. Then the bear says that overall he supports the bull's plan, but believes they need to cut down the amount of supplies because in the future they might have to face another army again. The bull thinks to himself that if he defeats everyone, he will become a hero. Then he is eager to find out if the bear already has a plan. The bear says he is sure that someone controls these corpses. He insists that if they find and defeat him, the other zombies will no longer bother them. The hero thinks that intervention will still be necessary. Then the hero asks the bear if he can be the bait, and adds that, in his opinion, the bear is just perfect for this role. The bear looks at the hero attentively and thoughtfully. The bear says he allows the hero to be the bait, then says that the others need to get inside. The bull is surprised. What about him? The bull keeps pointing at himself. The bear says it is already clear what he will do in this operation. He insists his task is to destroy the boss. The hero says that he relies on the bull, melts and is inspired by these words, and then he declares that he will protect them all. Then the heroes decide to set out on a journey to liberate the territory. The bear says that the heroes can trust him with the infiltration path. The hero creates a magic circle and then forms a fireball in his hand. He must disperse the crowd of zombies. Zombies walk around the perimeter of the castle and territory and are not going to let anyone onto their patch. Suddenly one of them hears some noise and turns around. At that moment a spell falls on him, and then the same spell starts flying towards the rest of the zombies. The hero attacks each zombie, trying to destroy them all, and unleashes fire on his enemies. The bodies burn, but they do not feel the fight. After falling under the hero's spell, they get up again. Then the hero begins to chop the burning corpses with a sword, cutting each of them. He swings the sword again and again, stroke after stroke. Suddenly a dead werebeast in armor attacks him from behind, from head to toe covered in fire. The hero manages to parry the blow, confronts the monster, but does not intend to retreat. In the end, the hero decides to use another spell on it, and the monster is spun into a vortex that appears out of thin air. At that moment, the hero's face is full of concentration. Suddenly a hand stretches out from the ground behind the hero. Another living dead is pulled out after it. It grabs the hero by the leg. Approaching this monster, his comrades are pulled out of the ground. It shocks the hero so much that he does not understand how this could have happened at all. Finding himself in an almost hopeless situation, the hero again decides to resort to fire magic and ignites all the monsters into flames. They burn to the bone and stop living forever. The hero continues to deal with the living dead who attack him from all sides. Then the hero says that they surprised him very much. After that, he notices even more beastmen corpses have arrived. He shouts to them to gather everything together immediately. Meanwhile, the bull, the bear, and the cat sneak into the castle. One of them says they entered quite easily. The bear replies that it's all because the hero is excellent bait. The bull asks if the bear also knows the elven castle well. The bear tells him not to pay attention to him and suggests moving on. Then he adds that there will definitely be an army in the next room, so he advises to proceed further. The bull shouts for the people to prepare for an attack. Right now, several knights and beastmen corpses are coming towards them. They don't understand how the heroes managed to infiltrate the castle at all. A knight takes out a magic stone and the bear notices it. The people shout that they will not give the castle to the heroes and then throw zombies at them. The bull says he will deal with them himself and immediately starts chopping the living corpses to pieces. The bull chops and cuts with an axe every zombie that falls under his blow. The cat covers the bull from behind, fending off zombies with his feet. The bull roars, insisting that zombies are no match for him, but suddenly a giant monster appears around the corner. The bull sees it and manages to deflect the blow. While the bull defends against the huge zombie's blows, he sees the living corpse has no end. The girl also doesn't understand where they come from and why they are attacking. The bear runs up to the knight and shouts to Lenya, the stone boulder must be destroyed. The knight tries to fend him off. The girl jumps onto the bull. He doesn't understand what the girl is doing. At this time, the cat looks at the living dead. When the knights were about to attack the bear, Lenya starts flying to help. She flies over the zombies and eventually crushes the stone lying on the knight's hand. The stone shatters into pieces. The knight doesn't understand how this could have happened. Then the action shifts to the hero. He continues destroying the living corpses, but suddenly they start disappearing on their own. After that, the hero concludes everything worked for his comrades. The heroes in the castle rejoice in their victory. The bear says that the zombies will disappear outside the castle. He proudly stands in the middle of the hall. The knights don't understand what just happened. They realize they have lost everything. Then the knights drew their swords forward and declared that they will not forgive the heroes, so they can prepare to go to the next world. The operation was successful. The hero is heading to the castle with his comrades. He finds them in this castle and wonders if they are all right. Bill says it was simple matters. Then he asks the prisoners if they are lying. They reply that they have no reason to lie and that everything they told them is the pure truth. The hero asks his comrades what they are doing. The bear replies that they decided to interrogate those who remained, but they are good for little. Then the bear says that Tetsuya does not look like these people at all. One of the captives, hearing these words, asks the hero why, if he is human, he is on the side of the elves and not the humans. He says, if the hero is truly human, then let him kill his comrades. In response, the bull declares that Tetsuya is his subordinate, so he will not do that. Then the prisoner wants to say something else, but suddenly another thought strikes his head. He says he has seen the hero somewhere before, that he is the one who was summoned from another world. The news shocks the hero's comrades, especially the bear. The action also takes place in the castle. The prisoner says he has seen the hero somewhere before, then adds, Tetsuya is the man who was summoned from another world. Then the captured knight sighs in surprise. The hero survived that fall. The hero realizes that the knight who pushed him off the cliff is that very person. The prisoner says he is not surprised at all that the hero sided with the elves. The hero's comrades, hearing that the knight insults Tetsuya, punched him in the face with all their might. The blow was so strong that the knight, along with his comrades, flies out through the castle window, and the hero's comrades just watch as the people fall down. The hero also approaches the broken window and watches as his tormentors fall. The bear does not understand how these people could say such things about his friend. The bull says he will not forgive anyone who insults his subordinates. Tetsuya, in turn, looks at his comrades with surprise. They look back at him the same way. Then the hero begins to say that everything the prisoner said is true and apologizes for not telling about it. The bear thinks that this explains the hero's sometimes strange behavior. The bear tells the hero not to pay attention to it because he should not torment himself with guilt over the past. For them, the main thing is that he is now nearby, that he is their comrade. The bear says they have come a long way with him and know very well what he is capable of, so the hero has nothing to worry about. The hero thanks them for such words. Then the bear adds, the hero knows too much, so he cannot escape from them. Then the bear thinks to himself that it is hard to believe. The hero was here just like that, so he decides to ask. The bear asks the hero to tell about the other heroes who were sent here. The hero says that 6 people were called along with him and 4 of them are heroes. The hero says that the highest level is the 125th. Then the hero thinks about what happened to that girl in the end. At this time, the bear reflects. According to the data taken from the interrogation, one of the heroes is pulling the squad and his level is 93. Then he thinks if nothing is done, the elves will have no future. The situation is too bad, but then he decides if Tetsuya is with them, they can avoid this. The action takes place in the capital Farishin. A girl stands on the castle wall watching what is happening below. Suddenly, an elf who is searching for her climbs up to her. The elf says he has come to her with a report. And the girl on the wall turned out to be Queen Saku. The queen asks the shogun to start the report. The girl nods in agreement. She says that now they have gathered all their forces, but they need 4 more days to fully assemble, and that they will manage before the people arrive. The elf continues and says that now people are taking the only open road to avoid disasters, but it will take more time. She also says that the verification block has casualties. The queen says that the block must be ordered to go deeper. The all lost because of the man called the hero. She says they have only one thing left. She says they just need to gather all their strength and treat people properly. The elf replies that here they can fully control magic, so she believes they will cope with the army. The queen looks sadly into the distance and then apologizes, saying it's all because of her. The elf complains and says that the queen is doing her best. The queen replies, she failed to preserve the peaceful life of the people. Then the girl gathers strength and asks to tell everyone the fate of the elves will be decided in the next battle, and she addresses her Pipleto fight with dignity. As a result, the queen descends to her people and begins to devise a plan with them to resist the humans. Mages prepare for battle, as do the elven warriors. The human army slowly advances toward the elven lands, led by a grim young man. Then the people finally reach the lands of the elves. The queen is informed about this. She is told that the army is coming to meet them, and it seems they do not intend to attack in parts. The queen replies, then they will also meet them with full force. The girl orders the magic squad to prepare. The queen says that as soon as they invade their territory, the elves will attack immediately. She adds, the existence of the elves depends on this battle. Suddenly, the queen is reported that something is going wrong. She is told that only one person is coming to them. The queen, confused, asks what he intended to do. The girl decides that the young man is playing the role of bait and decides to check his level, but she is knocked off her feet by the height of his skill. She concludes he is a hero. As a result, the queen orders to attack the boy with full force. The girl tries to object, but the queen says that action must be taken now. As a result, everyone was ordered to aim at one person and not to hit their own. The attack began and the elves moved towards the young man. The enemy is covered with a hail of arrows. At first, he is not even visible because of the dust, but later it becomes clear. These arrows do not cause him any harm. The stream of arrows does not stop, but the one summoned from another world continues to walk as if nothing happened. He thinks about how fed up he already is with all this. The elven mages have gathered here. They try to stop that boy. They press with all their might, but the hero continues to move forward, not reacting at all to spells or arrows. Then the elves change tactics. The commander shouts that the mages will not let the youth advance further. Suddenly, the main human army enters the battle. The humans attack the elves even before they manage to approach, striking with all their might. None of them will retreat. The living dead attack the elves. They bite off parts of their bodies. At the same time, the head of the humans does not stop and keeps moving forward. He does not pay any attention to the elven soldiers, but the queen notices that the enemy is getting closer and closer. Then the queen decides to heal the soldiers. Suddenly, the commander notices movement from above. The leader of the people decided to attack the queen, but her subordinate manages to put up a barrier against him. But the burden still breaks through the barrier. It falls to the ground with a loud thunder. It gets up as if nothing happened. Next to the youth lies the queen's subordinate in blood. She tries to get up and protect the queen, but she no longer has the strength for it. The young man finds the queen and asks if she leads the elves. He says, if he sends her to the next world, this territory will come to an end. He apologizes for being boring and then decides to take the queen's life. Suddenly he hears strange sounds behind him. He doesn't understand what is happening there. It turned out that Tetsuya came to help the elven people. The opponent begins to insist that he calmed everyone down, but shock appears on his face. He turns around behind and looks, not understanding. And the hero is riding a cat. The elven queen is in his arms. On the mountainside, clashes were visible. The hero and others watched from afar. Monsters charged at the elven soldiers who tried to fight back. The girl clenched her fists and cursed, saying that it was already a complete mess. The monster standing before them said, if they had come before the battle, something could have been done. The hero replied that they were now hindering the elves. Barry said that the plan called A did not work, so now they would act according to plan B. He clarified. First, Linnea would reincarnate and jump into the crowd. The girl accepted the order and reincarnated. The girl in the form of a beast ordered them to sit, and after that, of course, she regretted it. When all three sat on him, she said they were too heavy. The bear turned to the bull and told him to get down. The bull replied that he couldn't come down quickly, and the bear shouted that he would just leave. The bull asked again and clarified that it was really only about him. Others jumped onto the cliff, declaring they would go forward, and the bull spoke to them. From above he shouted that it was unfair, and they replied, "Forgive us." Linnea rushed forward headlong together with the hero, dragging the bear on her back. The hero asked the bear to listen and asked if he was sure that plan B would work. The bear grunted, thinking. The bear said that first they would break right into the thick of the battle and stop the people. At that moment the elves would have to run as far as possible. Then she added, if they retreat far enough they will attack like a meteor. To do this, Mech must first explain his plan to the elves. The hero asked if he was sure they would listen to him. The bear replied that everything was fine because they were led by a wise queen. The hero inquired if she was his friend. The bear said that after the capital became a battleground, it took on the role of the queen of the elves. Meku said that her name is Saku Samafaz and this is her younger sister. The hero shouted in surprise and asked again. Elves were fending off monsters with shields and shouting that they could not endure it. One of the monsters had already opened its jaws at the elf. Suddenly the monsters' heads were cut off simultaneously. The soldiers were gripped by despair because they saw their enemies dying. The line between Monster San, the heroine, sitting on it, chops off their heads. The bear shouts to Tetsui to look for a girl who resembles her in beauty. The heroine asks if it means he has to look for a girl who looks like the bear. She shouted that it was not so. She looked like her former self in her usual form. The hero replied, easy to say, but hard to find anything in such a crowd. The elves standing in a row whispered that the man ahead also supported them. Thai did not understand what was happening. The hero shuddered, looking into the distance where a horde of monsters was visible. The bear and the hero looked ahead tensely. In the distance, blurred figures flickered and thick dust rose into the air. The bear looked closer and saw his sister, who was shouting that she was here. The soldiers shouted majesty to her while Linnea jumped over them from above and rushed forward, knocking down all the monsters in her path. The bear sitting on her shoulders tripped them so they would retreat and let her pass. She shouted for them to clear the way. The figures approached and the hero looked intently until finally he made out the face of the one who was looking at the queen. The hero began releasing magic from his palm and hurled it at the boy, who turned toward them in surprise. The boy's eyes darted around. He exhaled in astonishment, examining it. In the end, the queen ended up in Tetsui's hands while the boy shouted from the side, asking what he was doing. The cunning elf staggered and babbled confusedly, asking who they were and begging to be released. The bear apologized to Her Majesty and explained that they were guys from the guild. They had been given a task. A sign jumped out of Lena's paw when they showed the queen their license. The girl replied that it looked as if they really were from the guild, but the bear grabbed her and said he fully understood her doubts, but now was not the time to discuss or consult. She asked me to trust them and allow them to help. The queen asked not to say that they would overcome them by numbers. The guy ahead is level 91. The bear told Her Majesty to be careful and look up. Something was approaching from above, and the girl asked what it was. They exclaimed what a gigantic ball it was. The bear explained, it is a heroic skill, and as soon as she gives the signal, the queen must order her army to leave the battlefield. The queen, glancing at the hero, mentally asked herself if he was even human. How could she trust a guild that took a man from its own rank show? The queen dodged and said she hoped for the best for them. The bear thanked her for the trust and promised not to let her down. The man shouted to the heroes. He said he was a human. So why is he bothering him? The hero replied that they had not seen each other for a long time and asked if he remembered him. The man was surprised and said he was seeing him for the first time. The hero asked if that was true because he remembered him. One of the attacking soldiers called him a hero and stated that he was the one who was also summoned from another world. The man asked if he was like that. Tetsuya replied that he owed them a debt, so he would not betray them under any circumstances. He raised his finger to the sky and ordered to look up. Military monsters with wide-open mouths stared in amazement at the sky and waited to see what it was. Men clad in armor silently watched, while Shun did not look up at all. He looked ahead. A huge fiery ball with a terrifying force flew over them right at the forehead. It was large and smoking. One of them asked where the meteor came from. The bear shouted to the queen that the enemy's attention had weakened and it was time to give the order to Her Majesty. The queen shouted to everyone to listen to her order. She told the leaders to move quickly to the capital. She added that they could lay down all their weapons and carry the wounded instead. The soldiers looked at her, listening to the order. The girl grabbed the wounded elf. The elf warrior told Her Highness to leave. The monsters watched his retreat and asked if this was also part of their plans. They asked what was wrong with him. They did not understand what exactly they were supposed to do next. One of the armored warriors shouted to the other soldiers to stop the elves and prevent the meteorite from falling. The hero pulled the threads like cobwebs, drawing them towards himself, and told elves to step back a short distance. The threads he held were tied to numerous monsters. He bound them and prevented them from moving. The hero struck the threads he held with lightning, and all the monsters that touched them were exposed to the powerful current, while others were trapped. There was no way out from any side. The commander roared for the others not to touch the warriors, otherwise the current would turn against them, and the warriors shouted, begging them to stop. While the hero continued the lightning attack, Shun suddenly appeared nearby. He swung to strike and asked the hero if the stone above was his too. A strong blow hit the ground. The man looked ahead in surprise. The hero and others were already fleeing on sleds. The bear asked what kind of power that Wasun strike. The white bear told Tutsuya that the elves had already disappeared from sight, so he could no longer hold back. The meteor was approaching Earth. A fighter next to that man fell to the ground and shouted that it was falling. That's it, the end. The meteor crashed into the ground. The queen, watching from the side, asked if it worked. Cracks appeared all over the meteor. In the middle of the battlefield, a boy stood, raising his sword, and sliced the meteor into fragments while his people lay on the ground. He asked, "So what? It's just a meteor." Above him appeared the hero, who was flying straight at the enemy. The man noticed him when he was very close, and the palm almost touched his head. Grabbing his face, the hero used acid shot. The man screamed, and the hero thought he hit, but soon realized, no. The man cast a restorative spell and raised his fist, hit the hero in the face, and he flew away. He curled up with a burned face and broke free with a curse. The hero fell to the ground. Clickadan heard sounds behind him. Turning around, he saw the bear and Linny, who realized they both covered him and were now lying after the blow. He asked Linnea if she was okay, and she replied that she was, but would soon pass out. The attacker said he would not forgive. He repeated over and over that he would not forgive them. His face was distorted and he shouted that he would kill them. Meanwhile, the bear called Tetsuya and talked about Plan 3. Mekyu said that they could only attack with a dark explosion. The hero replied that it was his strongest spell, but he needed 5 minutes to recharge, so he asked if she was sure. She answered that yes, somehow they would manage. He said that she, as always, was like a bear and growled at Tetsuya, "Let him go." Tetsuya released him. The elves froze, staring ahead, and the elf woman, as it turned out, was next to Tetsuya, not near the bear. The queen shouted at her sister. All four sat by the campfire and ate food. The bear looked at the table and said that it meant level 70, but in this case, they would not be able to defeat a person with level 88. The power of the curse is a very dangerous thing. The hero said that before he woke up, he did not see what was happening. The she-bear replied that he had pushed her away with his fist, and she lay on the ground for some time. The man shouted and apologized. She replied that it was all right, and because of the curse, he was no longer himself. The main thing was that everyone was alive. The bear decided to leave this curse thing for later, but it was still very difficult to come up with a plan to defeat the other hero. The bear called Tetsuya and asked how much time he would need to create a dark explosion. The boy replied that about 5 minutes. During charging, he would not be able to do anything. He turned to her and asked if she had any ideas. She thought about it and replied that theoretically she would like to finish the fight beautifully and quickly, but if something went wrong. Present time, the elf stood next to the hero and said she would help him, give him time to recharge. The queen shouted at her sister in surprise. The hero's skill had already started. He caught the shout that they were starting. The man shouted from a distance that the hero had already reached him. He did not know what he was going to do, but let him disappear, otherwise he would destroy him. The elf woman said that 2 minutes, while she could still be in her form, was not enough. She released roots from the ground and led it forward. The plants rushed straight at the attacker, who cursed loudly. With one swing of his sword, he cut through all the vegetation. The elf woman stood with her staff, looking ahead, and shouted that they were starting. She released magic again, and numerous huge roots appeared that wove a large protective dome. The queen said this was the very boundary recognized as the most powerful since the time of the first great battle with humans, the royal barrier. And she also said such a barrier can only be created by one person, Mechas Samaphos, so the queen returned. Their enemy stood still. The elf declared that this was her limit, but she had to hold on for another 5 minutes. The lintel began to crack and fall apart. The hero froze in place, trying to unleash his power. The lintel crumbled more and more, and the girl, seeing this, cursed silently. The enemy was advancing towards them, shouting at the hero to get out of there faster. The man tried to break the barrier, and his knights murmured behind him. One asked if they should help him, and the other said what nonsense he was talking because they would die if they intervened. The hero shouted to Mecha, and she told him not to pay attention and to keep charging. The barrier continued to crackle and split actively. The girl thought, of course she expected such pressure, but it still looks like she won't last even 5 minutes. The opponent will break the barrier. She began to turn back, amazed that the time was already up. She exclaimed that this was truly her limit. She turned again to the she-bear, and they managed to lift her into their arms. The elven queen held her. Mechu exclaimed to Saku in amazement. Long stalks began to grow from behind the queen, and the bear shouted that she must not do this after all, she will die. Sakura replied, if she protects those she brought, then there is a chance they will win. Then only one thing remains, doesn't it? But the she-bear still agreed and replied that she needed to hold the barrier for 3 more minutes. Sokka said she understood and asked Commander Yoma for reinforcements. The man ordered everyone who could still move to hold the barrier sections and save Her Highness. The elves all held the barrier together. From the other side, an invader appeared next to one of them, and the knight cried out. He struck and the elves scattered away. Then he kept hitting and the elves flew off the walls, not holding the barrier. The hero shouted for them to stop immediately. He could not break through this. The bear nudged him and told them to calm down, to accept that he could not help and ease the pain of all who were now on the brink of life and death. She added that he could win if he focused. One of the warriors thanked the hero even for the fact that they were destined to die here. They were all grateful to him for this chance. So they were asked to do as Meku says and leave them here. They were asked to go and win, to win for them. At that moment, the invader broke through the barrier and aimed his sword at the elves. Suddenly, a bull appeared. It intercepted the blow and protected the elves. Everyone was amazed by its appearance. The bull shouted to the gentleman that he was almost late getting here. He grabbed the attacker's sword. The bull thanked them for waiting. No, they have a chance to become heroes and win this battle. The man snatched the sword from the bull's shoulder and shouted that it takes too much time to end this. The bull began to settle from its wounds. It called out to Tetsuya, and the warriors did their job. The hero approached the enemy and aimed a strike directly at him. The hero apologized for being so late and used the FOD vortex skill. Screaming, their enemy flew into the air. The hero, clutching the magic orb in his palms, threw his large explosive ball at the enemy and he flew away. When the magic dissipated, a giant scar from the force of his blow remained on the ground. The monsters were also hit. They fell to the ground. Finally, everything emptied. The hero said he could and began to lose consciousness, falling forward onto the ground. He fell on his knee and on his side. Meku called Tetsui and asked if he was okay. He apologized, saying that his strength suddenly disappeared. The girl replied that there was nothing strange about it. It was such a powerful spell and his health seemed to be on the edge, so she told him to rest a little. The hero looked away and said it was impossible. On the other side of the ravine, enemies were watching them. The knight asked if they had defeated him. The situation escalated in tension and they told the captain that they needed to retreat. The captain asked about the retreat. He said that only those who have absolutely no strength left to fight, and just a little more and they will win. He said that now it was impossible to turn away. Clutching some object in his hands, he shouted at the top of his voice for everyone to rush into attack and destroy the elves. The bear said how stubbornly they hold on. Someone gave the command to act and an arrow flew from the sky. The arrow hit the head of one of the opponents and he fell. Everyone looked in surprise at what had happened. Even more arrows appeared and the opponents asked what this matter was. The monsters were quickly finished off with such an attack and they cried out in pain. One of the enemies finally realized what they were hiding, and the elf appeared behind him, telling the man that he was unlucky. The elves simultaneously pierced with swords those who remained, and as soon as the enemy fell to the ground, what he held in his hands scattered like a whirlwind. The elf stepped on the object, crushing it, and the entire monster army began to burn. While she was watching, the commander approached from behind, greeted and apologized for the delay. He said that everything was fine and thanked everyone immensely. The reinforcements that arrived stood before him. The bodies of the defeated enemies lay around. One of the soldiers asked if they had won, although they were cornered. When the commander raised his fist and shouted that the victory was theirs, all the elves twitched and shuddered. Everyone immediately began shaking hands and hugging each other, some mourning the fallen. The bear said that it was finally over, but they had many casualties. The hero, lowering his head, apologized for the fact that she constantly covered for him and the elves. She said it was not his fault, but the fault of the captains. From the side, someone shouted that he was in pain. It was the bull that the queen was bandaging. He screamed madly, begging if she could do it more carefully. The girl apologized and said it would hurt a little, but the procedure turned out to be excellent. The bull contradicted her, saying there was nothing there. The bear said that Saku is a professional in treatment. The main thing is that the victim is alive and she will do everything else herself. Meku looked at her sister and thought, since she herself, wounded, helps others so much, without her she became even more resilient. The queen shouted to all the wounded to come to her. Meku told Tetsui that he did well and expressed her gratitude to him. The boy, embarrassed, replied that it was nothing. Bear cut in, it will get worse, so everyone needs to gather together. Linnea turned back to them. The man had no idea whether he had really defeated him, but honestly he thought, if the opponent is a hero, then he should be much more capable, or he is simply mistaken. At that moment, something flew past the rivers and forests at incredible speed. The orcs turned around as soon as they saw it. Eventually it landed, and the impact created a hole. The orcs approached to take a look. That guy remembered him. A moment from the past came to mind, and he realized that he had already defeated him then. A large heap of monsters of various sizes was advancing from the forest. After the blow, the boy remained lying in the pit. He jerked his wristband for a moment. Barely noticeable sparks flashed. He looked at his hand, denying what he saw. He did not understand what had happened to his magical energy and why it suddenly weakened so much. He swore and clenched his fist. He said he must get out of here at any cost. He shifted his gaze to what was happening ahead. The orcs were moving straight towards him and did not take their eyes off him. He realized, now he was already on orc lands, although not long ago he was standing in the land of the elves. He angrily lunged at them and asked why they were staring at him. He shouted that he would destroy them all to the last one. After his scream, the orcs moved towards him. The man climbed out of the pit and watched. He was surprised when they began to approach. He was confused because he didn't think there would be so many of them. He didn't know what to do. They were coming at him in whole packs from all sides. He started cursing fiercely as soon as he realized he was cornered. He had to run, or else they would tear him to pieces. A man climbed down from a branch above and jumped on the orcs, and this boy landing behind the hero. It seemed to be a young man in armor. He raised his palm, asked how things were, and added that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The man asked in surprise what he was doing here, repeated his question, and answered that he came to destroy these orcs. After all, this was orc territory, and they were very dangerous. The man said he got involved in a fight with the orc king, who would have thought their leader would turn out to be such a weakling. Overall, his retinue got on his nerves. The boy asked him what he was thinking when he charged at the orc king with his fists. The man said he basically just guessed it would end like this, but they were on their territory. Now the boy understood why those two were chasing him all the time. The man rubbed his head and grumbled that now was not the time to argue. They had to find a way out of here. Shun said that was at least one good idea. The man looked at him again carefully, right in the face, and asked what was wrong with his face. He didn't understand and asked again. The man said it was like it melted on him. He remembered how Tetsuya poured acid on him and got angry, although he was shocked that Shun was still alive. The man told Shun with such weak magic he wouldn't last long. Then he sighed and declared that he would take care of the orcs, so it was his business to escape from this place as soon as possible. The man went forward and said, of course, thanks, but he could handle them without his help. Then he turned with a grim face and added that when he destroyed these lizards, they would still continue his empty talks. A little later in Elb's castle, Mecha said she hadn't taken a bath for a long time. Saku asked her sister to be careful and not run, or else she would fall. The girls were relaxing in hot water. Meku was very glad that her sister was practically unharmed after the battle over the Great Barrier. Meku hopes that the vision in her right eye will soon return. Saku replied that she was too weak, so she herself was to blame for her injuries. She added that Mecha had nothing to worry about, especially since it was already time for her to return to the kingdom. The bear replied that it was too late. Besides, Mecha will not be able to return home until she lifts the curse. She does not want everyone to see her in such a humiliating state. She thinks the elves will just mock her, and she does not want that at all. Meku said that they did not need extra noise and confusion, so it was better to disappear for a while. She complained that all her charisma, beauty, and talent had simply vanished, so it was necessary to restore her original appearance as soon as possible. Saku asked how they could restore her to her true form, and many believe she is dead. Meku replied, "We need to think everything through carefully, but if they try to restore her, they will face many risks, so first we need to figure out what to say to others when they see her." She decided to say that the gods are angry with her and decided to punish her by turning her into this worthless creature. From now on, she is cursed. She will remain in the body of a bear forever until her sister becomes queen. Saku blushed and told her not to exaggerate. People would hardly believe such a thing. Mecha stated that the elves would definitely listen to her. Besides, who doesn't love beautiful and scary legends? Magu knew everything would go awry as soon as the Alps occupied the territory. Meku said that she tried to divide everything equally and set a barrier on part of the elves, but because she was cursed, quarrels and wars over territory began. Meku did not even imagine how hard it was for her sister, so she thanked her for her efforts. The girl smiled, accepting the praise. Saku answered her sister that she only needed peace and quiet. This became clear to Mechu. Saku recalled and asked if that person was special. Mechu choked on that question. Embarrassed, the bear blushed and said that it was not so, he was only her student, so to speak. Saku looked carefully at her sister and asked again. She asked how much training a person needs to become so strong. Mekiu chuckled awkwardly and explained that he is from another world, so he is special. Saku repeated her words, he is from another world. Meku confirmed this again and said that while she was studying the records, she came across something interesting. She said they have such technology, they can summon the same people heroes from another world. Sakura stared in surprise. The bear said this information is extremely secret because they carefully hid it, and as far as she knows, Tetsuya is not the first to be summoned to this world. Saku said this means their powers are almost equal because he is from the same world, so he is special. Mechu was surprised and thought that maybe she misunderstood the word special. Meku told her not to worry, he is also her loyal student. She felt his power, just trust. Saku stood up and asked if this was the same man her sister recognized, then she could love him. Meku realized she meant that and really did. Megu said that since they are sisters, their tastes are similar. Saku asked what she was talking about. Megu admitted she wanted to take it for herself, but she would not be greedy and would share with her. She asked to listen and said she would be first. Saku asked what first meant. The bear did not explain, only said that first means first and ordered Saku not to raise the older sister. Saku replied that now she would have to call him brother. A little later, someone shouted, asking how she dared to say such a thing. A second shout sounded what she would say, how long she would need. The elf shouted that the board should be given to Mechu. The two sisters watched this. The elf said that she had guarded them all these 60 years, and interrupting like she heard was indecent. The elf replied that nothing would change if they were locked up, so they began to ask people for help. The man contradicted her words, saying these are elves after all. In all these 60 years, they almost came to conquer everything. There were no invasions during her reign, and now they see the result. The elf called to her highness and asked to put Mecha in her place for the sake of their future. Mecha felt that everything was happening strangely, but there was nothing she could do. Saku replied that she understood their feelings but could not allow it. Such a toy could not be a leader. Instead, the elves, looking at her actions, insisted that it was cute, that she herself was very cute, so they decided that everything was already settled. The girl did not understand why it turned out that way. Saku decided to stop there and added that her sister is currently carrying out a mission for the guild, so when everything is over, she will have to return. The others were stunned. A member of the royal family had ended up in the guild. Meku said that they helped them a lot, and even now they rushed to defend the castle. Meku said that they heard everything themselves. She couldn't just leave the guild for no reason. It seemed to her that it was the right thing to do. Then the elf ordered her to come to them on another mission. Remembering this, Maku explained that she would not be able to come to the elf territory for some time. She showed the documents and said that she still owed a debt to the guild. The elf shouted again, "A member of the royal family has a debt to the guild." Saku looked calm and said everything was as usual, so she was not even surprised. She asked her sister if she could stop disgracing the royal family and called her lazy. The bear charged into battle, asking who here was lazy. Saku, defending herself, replied that she really disagreed. The elf asked them to stop, saying now was not the time to deal with such things, and that guy turned to the elf standing nearby. He did not understand how someone from the royal family could so calmly come to the guild. Isn't that dangerous? But Saku thinks the opposite. With these guys, she is safer. She pointed at Tetsuya and Lenka. One of the subordinates reported that a new man appeared before the royal gates, claiming to be a hero. The bear rushed forward and said that she believes, sooner or later they will come for revenge, but despite this, the human army is moving too fast. She only asked me not to tell her that they broke through Braxel so quickly. The soldier replied that it was not true. They agreed that the heroes appeared individually from the orc side. The bear asked what he meant. She said that in any case it was necessary to check the situation. They were approaching the castle gate. The bear shuddered and asked what it was. Nearby, an elf called Maku. He was asked what was happening here. Saku and the hero sat at the same table, drinking tea and eating. The man said they had not been able to find food until they got here, and now they were finally being served. He was told that they did not want anyone to rob their territory. The man said that elven food was still good. This world was filled with races unlike humans, and their food did not match the food they were used to. Saku glanced at him sideways and replied that she was glad to hear that. The bear was tense, and the soldier behind asked what his level was. He was told that the maximum level was 99 and the hero currently had 95. The bear named Tetsuya, and the man said there was no doubt about it. This guy was one of the heroes summoned along with him. The man snorted uncertainly, looked at the hero, and said in surprise that he had already been told about it. He clearly remembers seeing Kaido and others beating him. He said Shun was very angry because he lost to him, was breathing heavily, and wanted to beat him as soon as possible. The bear impatiently asked if he was alive, and the man replied that he was. He was alive and well. Everyone was amazed. The man said he was not supposed to do him such a favor. Damn it, that he used him as an errand boy. That's why he told them he brought them a message. He said that Sion wants a one-on-one fight. He says he won't lose if it's one-on-one, so they need to keep others out. Shun especially asked the man to look after the plush teddy bear. He would wait for Tetsuya deep in the forest. So the man advised him to come, and they would wait at a safe distance so as not to interfere. The soldiers behind whispered that he would be put one-on-one with the hero, and no matter how strong he was, he would not be able to win. The elves declared, if he left them, what would they do with that man? They had not even yet restored their strength. The man replied that he likes to fight, but not with weaklings. They are incomparably weaker than them. He promised, if they do not bother them, he will do nothing. And if they keep joking, then Shun will come to them. If he quarrels with Shun here, he will have no choice but to get rid of them. The man thought it was much better than dealing with both of them at once. The elves were impressed. The elf called out to Mecha not to fall for the deception. He suggested killing this hero first. The bear asked what he was saying. He added that they would destroy them individually faster than they unite. The elf behind replied that it was nonsense. Even if that were true, they still fight the heroes continuously. Then they were asked what else they needed to do. A rooster appeared behind and ordered everyone to calm down. The hero called Sira in surprise. He explained that he came to take a very wounded man but went to the wrong place. The rooster heard almost everything the man said. He insisted, this place should have burned down long ago, but all he did was break into their territory and eat their food. The rooster said that if they continued to worry, the guild would join them. The elf was surprised because it turned out there would be a few more guild members. The rooster turned to Tatsuya and asked the younger one if he even knew how to win this battle. The hero asked the man if he could find out something. The man said he was going to kill his friend and asked if he objected. Tetsuya called out to the bear. The man quietly laughed and replied that it did not seem like Shun was just a friend who happened to be next to Kaido. He did not care what would happen to him. The hero realized he, clenching his fist, called out to Mecha. The she-bear closed her eyes and shuddered. The hero asked if she thought the reason was the power of the curse, since they could not defeat the heroes with the dark explosion. Meku thinks they will need it, but asked, "The hero knows how to use this power, right?" He replied that he has thought a lot since then, he thinks he can handle it, and admitted there is a problem with this. Tetsuya wondered how long it would take to get out of the abyss if he did not wake up soon and could not protect everyone. If only he had gotten himself into a situation where he could fight one-on-one away from everyone else. The bear said that the fact the hero was still alive was a real miracle, damn it, and there was no other way out. She added that they do not want to find themselves in a situation where they have to rely on such uncertainty, so they will take all possible precautionary measures. The she-bear told Tetsuya that she was sorry after all, she couldn't do anything. Tetsuya replied, "Don't worry, he will take everything under control." Saku apologized to the hero for relying on him again when it comes to elves. The boy replied that this was not the case, he is not indifferent to them. When the hero said he was counting on him, Rister gave him a thumbs-up signal and ordered Lenny to take care of Mecha, who was crying at that moment. Tetsuya rushed forward alone towards the forest where Shun was waiting for him. The boys watched him go. The rooster became curious about the hero. He sat next to the man and said he had always dreamed of talking to a hero. The man agreed it's still better than just sitting and eating. Rooster said he is already studying the movement of humanity and doesn't understand something about the recent invasion. He asked me to explain the reason. Meku was surprised that he asked directly. The man replied that he was not interested in fighting for territory, so he knew little, it was just Kaido's hobby. Bear recalled that this was their general, a man with a level cap of 105. The rooster just asked everyone to listen and stated that the first 3 territories captured by humans were the territories of fire-breathing beasts, ogres, and gnomes. It seems they were planning to invade the territory west of Death Valley. Therefore, the rooster thinks that invading the territory of the elves almost east of Death Valley makes no sense for them. The man snorted because he finally did the research. He will tell Yao, but only if they entertain him. In the forest, Shun stood leaning on a large log with his eyes closed. He opened his eyes and raised them to the sky as if to say, "Here it is already." He was tired of waiting. A huge meteor was flying toward him from the sky. The man drew his sword and looked at it. The meteor shattered into smaller fragments from the explosion. Shun jumped to the bullet and struck it. As soon as he was inside the fragments, he froze and looked around anxiously. He noticed that the hero was lying on the ground preparing a new spell. He laughed quietly and asked what it would be. He started cursing and immediately many fiery spears flew from him. An explosion occurred that hit him. He jumped out of the flames unharmed, landed on the ground, and declared it a pathetic firework. The hero was behind him in the fog of fire, preparing to strike again until Shun felt his presence. Shun, turning to his side, sent him away. Tetsuya used a sulfurous spherical spell and they stopped. Such an opponent managed to grab the hero by the wrist and still stabbed the sword into his chest. As soon as he freed his hand, Tetsuya fell backward to the ground. The sword was already lodged in his body. He lay motionless, covered in blood. Shun asked how far he intended to go. The hero lay on the ground in a puddle of his own blood. Shun, standing nearby, said he knew he was nothing but a mad hermitan. Now it was the elf's turn. The hero's hand, with a seal on the palm, began to tremble. He ordered Shun to stay put. Shun suddenly turned around, surprised. The hero got up from the ground and said he could not die halfway. He was stronger than he seemed and would do the right thing, kill him. He himself was walking towards Shun, bleeding heavily. The man did not understand what he was saying and asked again what exactly he meant. The black trail began to evaporate, a barely noticeable black mist. Shun growled through clenched teeth, stepped closer, and grabbed the hilt of the sword stuck in Tetsui's chest. He sharply drew a weapon from his own chest, shouting that he would now give him what he wanted and finish him off. And he began to rain countless sword strikes on the hero's body, while the hero did not resist at all. With each new blow, Shen repeated the words that death had come for the hero. Eventually, the hero fell to the ground, wounded all over, missing several limbs. Shun breathed heavily, trembled, and looking at Tetsuya's body, ordered, "Take the bite." The black fog began to thicken and at some point burst through explosions of a black dim mass. Shun was surprised to find that he was still moving and began to beg, "Stop, let me die already." A black mist covered him. From the darkness appeared a black hand and extended a palm to the boy. The Black Knight in armor began to strike Shun. The boy thought it was impossible. The hero began to open his eyes and quietly laughed. He was glad he had succeeded. He knew the path to the abyss lies through death. Somewhere a voice sounded it, asked if the hero could hear it, and demanded an answer. He remembered that he had heard that voice before. The hero realized it was really himself, so he was the one who brought him here from the very beginning. It was something like an abyss. It repeated the same pattern that was on his palm. The abyss said that they had finally met. Tetsuya apologized and said he had to wake up before he could talk to him. Bezodnya asked him to wait, saying everything was fine. Thanks to her, his strength is gradually recovering, and if everything is left as it is, he will be okay for some time. The abyss asked him to come here for the sake of power, didn't it? Then first he should learn about this abyss. Tetsuya agreed. He himself had asked this question, so he thanked her for the help despite having to fight monsters, and the abyss replied that it was all his own efforts. At first she asked to be allowed to tell him what the abyss was really like. She said that those who are given life in this world and on the other side too already have a place reserved for their souls that have flown away, and everything will depend on what kind of soul it is. But she added, in this world there is still meaning. It comes when exceptions to the rules die and are no longer needed by this world. She said that these places were not prepared for these souls, so they would wander aimlessly in different directions and later flow here, cut off from reality, and that is why this place is called the Abyss. Eventually, sooner or later, all the summoned monsters and aliens end up here, right where the hero stands now, and these pitiful souls are kept in this place. The hero realized how he got here after death, but he was immediately reminded he has the power of resurrection. He talked about how he devours the dead, exactly those corpses he had devoured then, in his opinion. He was told that it was true. He was explained those corpses were other foreigners, summoned by other people of this world and then thrown into the Valley of Death. In the forest, Shun was breathing heavily at that moment, spitting blood. He said that a hero does whatever he wants and asked how many skills he had in total. He also considered it unfair and too exhausting, but it would not last long until he ran out of ideas. Shun said he would kill him again and again. He rushed at the knight, swinging his sword. He struck him on the shoulder, but the blow did not damage the armor at all. Shun gritted his teeth. He shouted and struck in different directions, while the knight remained in place, did not fight back, and did not even move. Shun rushed away and frightened eyes stared at him. At that moment, a fist was already flying toward his face. The blow was so inhuman that an explosive impulse was triggered. Shun flew away and crashed into a tree trunk. All the trees he had previously crashed into had already crumbled. The knight's armor on his chest began to crack as he squeezed it with his palms. Shun froze in shock. A terrible humanoid skeleton with horns and fangs emerged from his chest. The nailed boy looked at it in horror. The skeleton began to unleash a magical attack. Shun remembered this move. The hero had already used it before. He rushed straight at the monster and shouted mockingly, so of course he could finish it. The ball instantly expanded as soon as Shun ran closer. The boy plunged the sword into the ground and asked if he needed to prepare. Incredible power and light burst out. Shun tried to stay in place, holding the sword. A gigantic explosion thundered. The knight did not move an inch. It stood next to a huge crater carved by the force of the impact. The knight looked intently ahead. Shun emerged from the fire towards him. He said it was nonsense. No, Shun doesn't even understand what he was worried about. He just needs to take the hit to seize the opportunity. He used the legendary mod and said that this way he could guarantee himself instant death. He can regenerate, but his megacool heroic move can only be used at the brink of death. That's unfortunate. He found it very boring. Shun stood opposite the Black Knight and they both froze, not moving a step. At that moment, the rooster and the hero man played an wrestling match, and the hero found himself in the Abyss. Abyss added that since ancient times people have repeatedly tried to summon heroes using great secret arts, but each time they failed and cast their souls into the Valley of Death to keep the secret. She added, soon, because many souls wander the world from the Valley of Death, the Abyss that was torn from reality, it connects with it. From there, the souls entered their world. The hero had to confront them in the Valley of Death. Souls were spilling out of the Abyss. The hero was surprised. Those dead souls were from the Abyss, so it turns out that the dragon's corpse also appeared before him. He was explained that it was for his own salvation. But because of this, the Abyss is now too tightly connected to the real world, and as a result, enemy forces learned about its existence. The hero repeated his words about the enemy force and asked if he meant demons. He was told that it was true. He came to settle personal scores with them. If everything goes the same way, they will be able to find a place that connects reality with the abyss, and then they will come there with a large army to destroy it. If this happens, a great war may break out, involving all the hero's friends. The monster does not seek war. If the heroes disappear from this world, people will again take up the great secret arts. It grants the heretic power that will allow him to defeat the heroes, but in return, the hero must kill those who possess the great secret arts. They can no longer allow souls from another world to come to the Valley of Death. The hero asked for forgiveness. He said that the scale of the story was too large and he did not fully understand. The creature was confused by his response. But the hero remembered something. He seized the chance, found priceless friends who help him in this world. He thought that he would continue to fight for them and live with them all his life. But at first the hero had a reason to fight. He wanted to become stronger and take revenge on those who selfishly called him into this world. Probably he forgot the anger he felt towards those selfish people. The creature asked the heretic if he agreed. The hero clenched his fist and replied that he was just about to take his very first step. At that moment in the forest, Shun and the knight stood against each other. Bright light and flashes resembling lightning came from Shun. The knight raised his fist and began to hit the man, and the man calmly accepted the blows without resisting. The young man asked if he even understood that he had no feelings at all. He grabbed the fighter's hand and tore it off. He looked at the armor and was surprised. Inside it was empty. Only black smoke was coming out of it. He threw his hand back and said he would open it and find out what was happening inside his body. The knight jerked back away from the hero and again began to break the armor on his chest. A skeleton emerged from there by magic. Shun asked if this was really the same trick again. He noticed the knight was not so clever and it would no longer work on him. He waved his hand and all the magic dissipated. Two mighty forces clashed in battle. The armor on the knight's chest was completely broken. Shun said that this was his strongest condition and it was time for the hero to understand. He could not overcome it. He struck so hard that the armor crumbled. The armor shattered into pieces and Shun froze, understanding nothing, mumbling something indistinctly and questioningly. Seeing the girl before him, he asked who she was. Shun, looking at the girl in armor, asked where this giant woman came from and inquired whether he had been fighting with her all this time. The girl's face began to evaporate, revealing her skull underneath. She said she understood. It seemed he wasn't trying to challenge them at all. It seems she did her job. She said goodbye to Shun, calling him a pathetic wanderer and wished him an easy death. The boy stared at her in shock. The girl found herself in an abyss and screamed desperately, clutching her head with her hands, that it was unfair. If only she could put all her strength into everything, she would never lose in life to someone like him. What outraged her was not even that they still kept silent about it. Shun even called her a huge woman. He himself was just small. The hero noticed her and said it looked like a skeleton struggling to get out. The girl noticed him and called him a heretic and also said how good it was that he came. The creature replied that it was all thanks to him. It also asked if the girl thought her last words sounded a bit bad. He was already getting goosebumps. Supposedly, despite their serious conversation, she still went and told him. He never ceases to surprise her. The girl did not understand what he meant. The hero smiled and told the creature not to be so harsh with her. The girl grabbed the boy's hands and thanked him. The creature replied that it did not matter. He had very little time left. The creature must tell the heretic about the mark on his hand. She told him that it is not a curse, it will help him increase his power. The creature knew the hero still could not use all the accumulated, but thanks to the mark would be able to become even stronger. But he must remember the power of the mark comes from the abyss. If he uses it where he shouldn't, he will bring demons upon himself. She ordered to listen carefully and told him that the real world is full of those who have sided with demons and now hide. They are very hard to find. So the hero must kill everyone who knows about his power. This way he can protect all his loved ones. The hero replied that he understood and promised to be careful. He thanked the creature for everything. He was told that there was no need to thank and asked not to let them down. This was the last thing the hero wanted to clarify. He asked if every time he uses his power, he would have to die. The creature reminded him that it had just said that. The hero could simply let it go, but now it was time to return. The hero looked at the souls below. He thought and asked if the absorption ability could handle the problem of souls trapped in the real world. The entity replied that it would be extremely difficult. The abyss said although he could return to life, his body was not immortal. In a few decades, his lifespan would end faster than that of elves. When that happens, the hero's soul will go to the abyss just like all the other souls he absorbs. He realized, ultimately, in the very end, he will die in this world. Now in the forest, Shun stood still and watched as the smoke returned again. Shun asked again what was happening here. It seemed boring to him. He asked the hero who appeared how much longer he would keep doing this. Tetsuya apologized for making me wait. He began to use his technique, insisting that this time would be the last. He used the skill of release. He suggested they finally put an end to this fight. A giant monster appeared behind the hero. A new battle began. They collided with a thud. Shun shouted to the hero to do it. He threw strikes and shouted to the hero, "Die!" Tetsuya raised his fist to strike, and the creature behind him mimicked his movements. He hit Shun right in the forehead and he flew back. The next hit did not take long to come. The man thought he had to become legendary and the most powerful, but then why was he being hit so brutally? He shouted that he would never tear the hand off the hero's creature. The wrist began to fall to the ground and crumble. Satisfied, Shun ordered him to accept it. New bones were already appearing in place of the severed hand. From the black haze, fists flew out one after another and rushed at the surprised boy. Each of them hit the target exactly. The victim screamed from the blow and began to fall to the ground. The hero hovered in the air and watched Shun lying on the ground after the blow, and the boys seemed to be overcome with hysterical laughter. Anne looked up and said that it was nonsense and could not be so. Shun's body trembled. He saw a meteor. He shouted at it, "Not this stone again." He got up on his feet and shouted to the hero that he had smashed this thing to pieces many times. Did he really think he wouldn't be able to again? A web trailed behind him. A spider caught him in its nets and did not let him move. The man shouted, asked what kind of spider it was, and demanded to move aside so he could break free. His entire face was lit up by the bright glow of the meteor that fell right on him until he managed to dodge. The severed hand of the creature, which had already been cut off earlier, flew out of the ground, reconnecting with the body. The hero silently watched from the air what was happening below. From under the sphere, countless things poured out. It began to slowly crack from below. The hero carefully watched as his meteor split again into many fragments. With one powerful explosion, the stone split and the fragments flew in different directions. Shun shouted that the hero would not joke with him. In this state, he had the greatest power and an invincible ability to recover. Tetsuya had no chance. Another powerful blow hit Shun and everything burst into light. The hero attacked him in various ways simultaneously and a huge explosion rose. Shun shouted that he needed to destroy so much that there was no time for the hero. He tried to resist the blows while the hero silently continued to attack him. He looked at him with the gaze of an abyss until the opponent's figure disappeared into the fog. The spider that had earlier bound Shun passed the boy's sword to the hero on the web. Tetsuya grabbed the weapon and raised it to strike. Shun shouted that he was fed up with this world and that if they kept getting stuck here like this, they would never get into the wash. He promised to slaughter all the worthless ones and return home. The hero approached him from the front, swinging his sword. When Shun saw him, he exclaimed in surprise. With one powerful swing of the opponent's sword, the hero cut through Shun's body. The blow was so strong that Shun was thrown into the air and he began to fall back to the ground. He flew through the air upside down like a ball until he finally stopped. He was cut, but his head still moved. He did not stop asking questions. He rose on his elbows and hissed in denial, looking at his own body. He crawled to the other half and insisted that they needed to gather themselves and pack everything. Shun screamed in fear when the hero's palm landed on his shoulder. He sharply looked back. He shouted and asked the hero what he was even doing. Shen said to let him go. He said that if the hero continued to hold onto the same spirit, Shen would die. But the hero did not let go. He kept holding him. He sighed and said that they really needed to hurry. The hero saw he was in shape again and his regeneration ability was not working. Shun was exhausted. Even if the skills were powerful, everyone still had a limited health reserve. The hero thought that in the end, it became a battle of endurance. The hero had no idea how he managed to win before the release deadline. Shun groaned and did not understand why he ended up in such a mess. But the hero finally answered, this is the end. He could no longer do anything. The man trembled, slowly lowered his head to the ground and repeated that he did not want to come to this world, did not want to die in another, did not want to die at all. Shun just wanted to go home. The hero looked at him, and when Shun fell silent, he said that he painfully wanted to go home, and he did not doubt at all what he was doing. He even felt a little sorry. In the abyss, a bright light flashed. It was getting closer and closer. The skeleton girl sat still, turned her head and watched the glow. She asked if it was not Harrenauthor one. After he dealt with the deadly battle against the hero, the boy went to his friends, and Tetsuya rushed forward along the road in the forest. He ran and thought that too much time had already passed, but hoped that everything was fine with the others. Judging by the character of that hero, he is unlikely to break his word, but if he suddenly changes his mind for some reason, he will have to give his all to defeat him. He does not believe he can fight such a powerful opponent and protect others at the same time. He can't use the release on Meku right now and hopes to leave without causing trouble. A sound came from the side. The hero immediately understood where the noise was coming from and rushed even faster in that direction, hastily ordering everyone to stay calm. At that time, the rooster from the guild and the hero continued to fight using arm wrestling while others watched. The hero won again, though he was all chained up and weighed down with weights. While Saku was treating the rooster, he said he wanted to do it again. The hero, shifting the weight onto his shoulder, replied that he had lost so many times already that he no longer had the courage. He asked if he really loved arm wrestling that much. The rooster replied that this was not true. If he had not been forced, he would not have done it. He glanced at Saku behind his back, turned away. The hero smiled and said it's a pity, but thanks to him he can kill time. He told the others that they could further strengthen with the magic of the rooster. The elves used their skills, and the bear was dissatisfied. They had nothing to defeat the hero with. Then the hero suggested giving them a head start. He would increase the steel ball to 10. Tetsuya watched this with his mouth agape in shock. Gasping, he asked everyone what they were doing. They all turned to him together, calling him. Everyone rushed to him. They scared him away. They surrounded the boy and excitedly asked if he was okay. The man sighed but smiled and threw a steel ball. Maku told the hero that he looked neglected. The boy awkwardly laughed and replied that the enemy was strong. He called Lienya, who was hanging on his shoulder, and asked why she was in that form. She replied, because she lost arm wrestling in her beast form. The hero, standing among friends, looked intently at the man before them. He stood with his arms crossed on his chest. Finally, the man spoke and asked, "Has Shun died?" The hero drew his sword from behind his back, threw it to the man, and answered yes. He apologized, and that was all that was left of him. The man held the weapon of the fallen hero in his hand. He said that Shun liked to rush at the crab. Although he was weak, he knew that this day would come someday. So in the end, the man is not interested in other people's battles, and since he no longer has reasons to stay here, he will go home. But before doing so, the hero, thanking for the hospitality, can give them some information. Although the man said he knew almost nothing, for the same reason that Shun attacked the elves' territory, he believes that Shun just wanted to impress Kaido with a show. 4 of them were with him in the main part of his gang because he was the strongest, but even then Shun was the weakest among them. He added that even after becoming a hero, he remained the same. Apparently, he did not like it, so he tried to foil Kaido's plan. He said, now they know that Hiroshi is stupid, but he is loyal to Kaido and he himself is interested only in strong people. The man does not think that people will invade the elves' territory anytime soon, only until the invasion of the western lands of Death Valley is over. He is sure Kaido will definitely capture all the western territories. He said that once he finishes, he will move east, so until then they better be ready. The man quickly left, leaving elves. The she-bear said that they need to regroup their forces as soon as possible. Saku agreed with her, but the soldiers, tension was felt from the elves. Saku asked everyone to pay attention. She said that many people have given their lives in this war and that another one will soon begin. And then they dressed the level 90 hero and pushed back the human army. One of the elves addressed Her Majesty and said that it was Tetsuya's merit. If not for him, they would not have defeated the hero and pushed back the army. Sakura replied that he had already turned out to be one of them, and she poked him with her finger and shouted that he was the fiancé of her sister, Makusamafa's. The bear and the hero gaped in shock. I asked my sister to confirm this. After these words, the elves and guild members froze with stunned faces. Meku scolded her sister silently, opened her mouth, hesitated, but still confirmed her sister's words. The hero looked at her questioningly. The elves began to say how to think that they were saved by Mechu's man despite the fact that he was of another race. He was their hero, and there was no one more reliable than him. Mechu apologized for leaving the problems, but now they needed him to cheer everyone up. Then Rufak was already unconscious, and the elf asked him to keep himself together. The man told her not to worry, he was just surprised, and this in no way caused him any problems. The girl looked at him lovingly, deciding that he did not mind. Socrates suggested strengthening the bond between the elves and the guild, preparing for the upcoming war. She told everyone from Mesto to maintain teamwork. A bandaged bull appeared behind me and asked to pass a message to him. He was curious about the hero they had mentioned earlier. The bull thought they were talking about him. The rooster, turning to him, sighed and said that supposedly he was fine. The rooster bowed and said he would pass her words to the guild leader and now asked to excuse them. But he almost forgot to tell the newcomers something. He poked the hero with his finger and said that he was ordered to return immediately, although the situation was special, and he had already stayed here too long. He asked if it was true that he was very tired, wasn't he? He allowed him to stay here for a few more days and would solve the problem of his absence. At first, he would just take the wounded man. Tetsuya replied that everything was fine and he would return with them. They should no longer cause problems. He asked Mechu if she minded. She said, if he wanted it, she did not object. They were guild members, so it was better for them to return. Mechu turned to her sister and apologized. She immediately replied that she knew she would give her the elven lands. The sisters looked at each other and Mechu said, I was counting on you. When everyone was seated in the cart, Saku asked to be careful on the road and Mechu asked her sister not to get sick. Finally, they gave the command to depart. Saku called out to Tetsuya and he turned to the girl whom she asked her sister to take care of. The man replied to Her Majesty that she could rely on him for this. The girl was embarrassed. He bowed to the queen, saying that he would do the same then and went further behind the cart along with his comrades. The girl folded her palms in a prayer gesture, crossing her fingers, and asked her sister and brother to be careful. Time passed and on the roof of the huge castle, nervously looking around, stood the girl. Finally, she saw what she was looking for and smiled. A cart with comrades was rolling straight towards her. Everyone returned alive and well. The girl was told that thanks to the hero's deeds, the return of people's territories was going well. The king was very pleased. He definitely would not drive her away anymore. The girl asked Zatomi in the mirror if she would return. She needed exactly her. Zatomi replied that she refused. She would never return. At that time, in another place, the guys were asked why the guild representatives were on the lizardmen's territory. They explained that they came to negotiate a partnership, but during the conversation, they were attacked. The man, towering over everyone, shouted that they were monstrosities, as always. The girl calmly replied, now is not the time for dwarves to intrude into foreign territories because a dangerous human race is approaching neighboring lands. The man fiercely barked, grumbling indignantly that although she was from their clan, she was too stupid. They had already once pushed back the human tribe and ordered them to look at their latest technologies, a moving golem that was not afraid of humans. The girl examined them and thought that they could no longer be helped. The girl told the recruit to destroy this thing, because otherwise they would underestimate humans too much and then they would not be able to continue negotiations with the lizardmen. Mechu said that this was a good opportunity, so why not try his new skill? He took the new skill from Shun. He asked if he could use the release then. Mechu pondered and inquired if there were any restrictions on its use. The man asked if he was going to destroy their golem and he replied that well, to some extent. Dwarf shouted to try if he could. He raised his fist at the hero. Mechu shouted to Tetsuya that he could unleash power. He used the skill and around appeared clouds of smoke and flashes of light. He used the legendary form and hid the opponent's chest. Cries were heard. The hero felt it was bad because he could not control this skill. As a result, after this blow, everything turned into complete chaos. With a crash, it fell to the ground. Mechu froze, asking what those moves were. The short-haired girl told the recruit that he did great. Dwarf began to get out of the golem, shouting curses. He could not imagine that their golem could be destroyed so easily. Other soldiers tried to stay in place until the hero shouted at them to get out of the way. Tetsuya was flying straight at them from the sky. The leader sharply exclaimed in surprise and, as if petrified, stared fearfully at the approaching hero. Guild Tower. Inside, Meku was making his way through the crowd, holding documents in his hands, and repeating that finally Hiro and Lenya were standing side by side. The she-bear loudly shouted that they had already paid all the debts. Friends stood nearby and began to rejoice, and the hero asked her to be quiet, it was embarrassing. The girl standing behind said, "This is for all their recent achievements, especially in the territory of the elves, after they decided to pay all their debts." In this last mission, the recruit also dealt with the dwarf tribe, and all thanks to him, the negotiations went well. The young man thanked me for the praise, embarrassed. Meku said that this means they finally got the official license. The girl explained, it does not depend on her. A voice sounded behind the bear. She turned around and asked who it was. Everyone started talking, calling out to the guildmaster. They thought it was him and thanked him for the hard work. He greeted them and said that Top Gun was already here. He was the guildmaster. The girl froze in shock, realizing this. The guildmaster said that he had read their mission reports and, knowing their abilities, gave them an important task, and they did wonderfully. He thinks they deserve licenses. Mecha was happy and said that finally they would be able to freely choose tasks. In connection with this, the guildmaster wanted to ask them something. He said that the human race, which destroyed the lands of the tusked beasts and caused great damage to the elf territories, is rapidly gaining strength. He said that from now on they would work closely with neighboring territories and resist the human race. If they do not come to an agreement with it, there is a chance that many tribes will be destroyed. Looking at the map, Meku asked in surprise if this was really human territory now. The bear asked when it became so huge. So the guildmaster wants them to listen to his orders a little better. Mechu remembered her sister's words. Soon they will have to prepare for a full-scale war. She thought there wouldn't be enough time to find a way to restore the body. She replied that, given the current circumstances, they had no other choice. She asked Tekka if everything was okay, and the boy agreed. He thought if he could find out their location through the guild, it would be easier for him to achieve his goal. They were thanked for their understanding and ordered to rest before the next task. The guildmaster watched the boys until they left. The boss called Mecha and asked if he could take a moment of her time. He wanted to tell her something. The girl asked distrustfully if he was sure. A little later, when night fell on the earth, Mekiu was walking the streets and entered a house, saying she had returned. In surprise, she screamed when she saw Tetsuya and Lenya in a strange pose. Their hands were on the hero's face and they were very close. As soon as Lenya got close enough to the face of the sitting boy, Mecha shouted and asked what they were doing. Lenya began to feel his face, to snort, to hiccup. She said she felt nothing. The man looked frightened as he tried to explain that she was just sniffing his right eye. Meku grabbed her head and shouted that Tetsuya has a fetish so that girls could smell his right eye. The boy also roared, like, "What kind of fetish?" and asked the girl to calm down. A little later, she was finally explained. When the curse activated, he felt something was wrong with his right eye, so he pressed it under the bandage. The man apologized. He should have told her immediately. Meku increasingly understood why in recent days they put a bandage over his eyes. She asked if it was possible to remove his curse. Lenya took his hand and turned pale with horror. The right hand still stinks, which means the curse is not removed. The man turned sideways. He told Maka not to look so worried because everything was fine. The girl still decided to ask if that meant it was not a fetish. The man thought to himself, could she really be worried about this? The bear thought and said, damn it, this is the same problem they need to solve. She was glad that now everything was not so serious. She added that now that he had gained the hero's power, he could no longer rely on his curse. After all, this ability is extremely strong. The hero replied, well, maybe if he masters it. He said that this skill drains health very quickly. He opened the status window and explained, the hero can stay in legendary mode for a long time, but he with his current health reserve only for a moment. Mecha understood he needs the same characteristics as the hero, a skill that only heroes can use. Meku was horrified his characteristics sharply increased. But she said that they were still very far from the hero's level. The hero thought he would not be able to release all the power he absorbed, but if he used the power of the abyss. He recalled the creature's words, you must kill everyone who sees her power. Tetsuya, remembering, asked the elf girl what she was talking about with the guild master. The girl replied that it was a meeting and their next mission was to get to the shipyard. The boy asked again and she said again, it seemed there was a man called Saint. The girl explained to the boys, in neutral territory, the city of VR4 is the closest to human lands. She explained that only a few people found it and returned again to the boy who was asking if he was listening. The man froze ahead in shock and mentally feverishly tried to figure out what kind of horses these were at all. Then he turned to the girl, apologized, and asked her to continue. She also added that the city of Verfer, where they are now heading, is the only city in the neutral territory created by the people from the Union. These are dangerous lands where fierce monsters often appear, and, until recently, this city was empty. He remembered Mecha, that huge black bull they once defeated, also came from there. Lenya added that this is the very monster that drove them into debt. The girl continued to tell and said that one day a human girl appeared and she began to exterminate monsters to protect the city and the people living in it. She said that thanks to that girl she felt safe and a path appeared. Then they started trading with other cities there and the city quickly flourished, and due to several factors it developed even faster. Mako asked about the facts. That girl was called a saint and she became popular. She herself does not know the details, but the saint has a charm that attracts people. Many races relocated there because of her. She told them that first they need to gather information about the people in the city. They need to collect as much data about the people as possible, no matter how small. Secondly, the whole company must talk to the saint. She must be extremely strong if she can destroy monsters alone. The girl noticed it will be bad if she joins the human invasion. She said that they somehow need to convince her, and it would be even better if she was interested in joining the guild. That bull roared at the top of his lungs, which, in other words, meant they needed to find out everything about her. He said, "Leave it to me." The girl, who was surrounded on both sides by others, resisted and trembled, saying this was her job. She asked the boss if he could handle it. Then the bull said, "Rely on him." Meku noticed that he looked too confident, so she asked if he might know something about the saint. He turned away and stammered, trying to deny it. She hesitated, looking at him, and asked why he pretended to avoid the answer. Their carriage finally arrived, and one of the horses thanked them for their services. They reached the shipyard. The girl said goodbye to the horses that were leaving. Meku, sitting on the head of line, said she would never have thought that until recently this place was empty. And now she told them to get on with their task. Bothily quietly giggled when she noticed the boss talking to someone. She called out to him. She approached him and asked what he was doing. He replied that he was gathering information. She approached the guys and said, "Probably the saint went to kill monsters and now he is not in the city." Meku thought about it, so today they would not see her. The chief replied that this was not so. If you just need to see her, they can. They were told that today there would be a concert in front of the cathedral. The girls looked at him suspiciously and asked about the concert. Line said that he supposedly knew too much. Chasha turned away and excused herself. Supposedly everyone knows this. He replied that if you walk around the city, you can see a bunch of posters about the concert. The girls examined a flyer that said about a special concert of the saint after sunset, right in front of the cathedral. Meher said that they are really posted everywhere, and Chasha advised in this case to split up. He quickly took off and ran away, and Meku asked him to stop. The boss said goodbye and said they would meet somewhere later. Annoyed, Meku asked where, and the girl behind her was carefully examining the city map. She said she would act herself, and judging by the boss's reaction, they will indeed be seen there at the concert. She said that for Tetsui's relatives, let her send the information and he will handle everything. The management suggests to her, people live in the area near the cathedral. The girl waved her hand and said she is counting on him. Meku believes that only they truly take the mission seriously. The man looked around, pondering this atmosphere. It seemed there was nothing strange. They wandered the city, observing the locals. The man approached the man and apologized with a smile. He said he heard that he might meet his relative here. Those who were near him became alert. Tetsuo said that if they didn't mind, they could talk a little. The man replied that he didn't mind, but first he would apply a level search on him. When he found out that the hero's level limit was 1, he shouted. The man apologized for being confused. They did not expect that a person in such equipment would have a level limit lower than theirs. And if so, he should know why their 30 men are so worried. The children ran to Linnea and she showed them mecha so they could play. Then the man said that in this city all people have a low level. Because of this, others treat them like garbage. And those who live here had no choice, they had to leave their homeland to lead a normal life. Meku asked if it was really humanly possible for the king to turn a blind eye to such cruel treatment. The man replied, Even more, it was the king himself who started the persecution of lower-class people, and the lower-class people have nowhere to live. Meku asked in surprise if the human king had gone mad since humans are the treasure of the country. It is unacceptable to oppress people because of their status. She said that treating one's own people who are almost gone this way is not the way. The man said that the territory of the people is expanding, but he feels sorry for the representatives of other lower-level race. Their homes were taken by the people. He asked the hero, who probably also had a hard time. He added that this place is under the protection of the saint and one can live here peacefully. He said that if there are problems, he can consult with them and they will help in any way they can. The man thanked them. That man handed him a bag and said he had just picked the fruits and asked him to take them. Others were still carrying boxes too. They said they were also tasty and also just from the tree. The saint's concert is about to begin. The great cathedral and the crowd of people are watching the stage where the saint will appear soon. The girl from the guild couldn't see anything because of her height. Someone beside her said there were a lot of people and she turned around. She waved to the guys and said they did a good job, then asked how they were doing. Meku looked beaten up. Meku said many were beaten. He was covered in bruises and scrapes. The girl asked to herself, "What?" They say all the people in this city are small fry and they gathered because of persecution. If the saint really protects them, then she probably does not support these people. The dwarf understood and asked the hero what fruit he had in his hands. He said they gave them to him as soon as they saw his level. The girl smiled as if to say, "What kind people and how sweet." The boy confirmed, "There are indeed many kind people here, so he feels safe." Meku asked where Bose was. The gnome looked around. There were too many people here, so finding him would not be easy. People suddenly started screaming. They scared the guys. They asked why everything started so abruptly. They turned back to where their boss stood with a bandaged head and shouted that a saint was coming. Meku shouted that he was there. She found the barefoot. When the bull saw his subordinates, he was amazed. They asked what he was wearing. He shouted that it didn't matter and ordered them to watch the stage. Someone came out on stage, thanking everyone for waiting. The hero was in shock and kept thinking, what is even happening? The girl on stage asked everyone to have fun until the very end. He remembered this girl. She was called into this world together with him. He still sees how she stood next to Kaido and the others. The music started on stage and the girl began to sing. She sang about whether he would take her hand and lead her into this new world. She asked me not to let go of her hand. The lizard standing next to Tetsui hissed loudly and hoarsely called the saint. The hero looked at her in surprise and thought this no longer resembled a concert. It looked like a real idol. The girl on stage spread her arms to the sides and the crowd burst into applause for her praise. The hero thought that in any case he was glad she was safe. The girl on the stage looked happy. Tetsuya, blushing with shame, was called from below and he looked down there. The girl was holding onto his pants, turning her head aside and saying that she was a dwarf. She said that was why her face looked like that, but she was 50 years older than him. Her face flashed red. She covered it with her palm and said she saw nothing. So can she sit on his shoulders? The boy silently looked at her. He still lifted her onto his shoulders and the girl, confused, laughed, saying she felt awkward. Next to me, Meku looked worried. She was shocked to finally see the saint. She said it was incredible. She had never been to a concert before. Meku glanced at her sideways. Maku turned away and covered her mouth with her paw. Behind her, a crowd was bustling, enthusiastically cheering for the saint. She opened her jaws wide, watching in awe. She mentally decided that this was exactly what she needed. She recalled the conversation with the master, so she approached him and asked what he wanted to talk about. She said, if it is about the mission, then he better turn to Tetsui. The master replied that this was not so. He was to tell her something. The former queen of the elven tribe, Mekusamaphos. He knows who she is.